te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, ki mā taratara ki tai. E he aki ana, ti atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri o. Morena everyone, and welcome to our final Environment and Climate Change Committee of this triennium term, council term. It has been a pretty full-on 3 years in a lot of ways, but I think with this new committee this term, we have achieved a lot, a significant amount in the environment and climate change space, have got significant things over the line, planned strategies, and also significant budgets. I'd like to acknowledge the Mayor for allowing this committee to exist and appointing myself and Deputy Chair Pipakum as Chair and Deputy Chair, but also to all the staff team and those involved in all this committee's work, because I think that we have done a significant amount, and we should definitely be proud of the progress despite the massively difficult 3 years it has been. We've still managed to do quite a lot despite the disruptions. Thank you. So we'll move straight to the apologies. Sorry. Oh, we do that first. Sorry, Sandra. Sandra's here telling me off. Sandra will do a roll call and then I will announce the apologies.
Thank you, Atamarie members. Councillor Bartley? Councillor Casey?
No, Sandra.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore?
Kia ora.
Councillor Collins? Councillor Coombe?
Atamarie.
Councillor Cooper?
Aye.
Councillor Dalton?
President Sandra.
Councillor Darby?
Atamarie.
Mayor Goff?
Good morning.
Councillor Henderson?
Kia ora.
IMSB member Honeck? Councillor Mulholland?
Good morning, Sandra. Present.
Thank you. Councillor Newman?
Good morning, Sandra.
Councillor Sayers?
Yes, present, thank you.
Councillor Simpson?
Morning, Sandra. Morning, Chair.
Councillor Stewart? Councillor Walker? Councillor Watson?
Morning, Sandra.
Councillor Young? IMSB member Wilson?
Morena tātou.
Thank you, members.
Morena members, and I saw Councillor Bartley up on the screen. I'm not sure her volume worked in that moment. Right, thank you, members. We also have apologies from Councillor Filipina, who just called to make sure we had that absence, so thanks, Alf. And Councillor Fletcher, there are no apologies for lateness, and there is one early departure apology from Councillor Linda Cooper. If I could have a mover, Deputy Chair, and a seconder, Councillor Henderson. All those in favour? Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have confirmation of the minutes. Could I have a mover? Councillor Young? Councillor Darby to second. All those in favour? Aye. Are there any declarations of interest?
Aye.
There's a time lag at your house, Councillor Casey. There are no declarations of interest. There are no petitions. There's no public input. And now we will move to local board input, and I've seen him online, our chair of the Kaipatiki Local Board, John Gillen, and he's here to speak to the Waimano Little Shoal Bay Shoreline Adaptation Plan. Kia ora, John, thank you for joining us. So you'll just have the normal 5 minutes. I'm not sure you have I don't think you have a presentation, but
No.
There'll be time for questions as well. So just whenever you're ready,
Sure.
thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to the committee for allowing me to speak today. There's a lot of love from the community for Little Shoal Bay and a lot of passion for what is happening there at the moment with the seawater inundation and flooding, both over the existing seawall during king tides due to climate change and also through the streams and wetland, which has been steadily increasing since the tidal gates were removed some time ago. The Kaipariki Local Board has for a number of years been working with both staff and representatives from a number of local community groups on various assessments and planning around the future of the park and the value that the public places on all of the assets and areas within the park. And I'd really like to thank Sarah Jones and her team for the work they did and for navigating the range of opinions and resolutions from the local board. After the local board resolved on protecting much of the park assets and the freshwater area from the saltwater inundation, Paul Kleinak's team escalated a mini shoreline adaptation plan for Little Shoal Bay, and I'd really like to thank Paul and his team for doing that. Through the SAP process, we heard from a wide range of the community groups, mana whenua and staff, on whether for each area within the park there should be active intervention from the flooding, or whether we should allow it to flood, or various options in between. And while the consultation on this was underway, a huge number of the local communities signed a petition urging council to protect the assets in the bay from inundation, and that helped to boost the number of formal responses to the consultation. After all of the opinions were taken into consideration and the local board put forward its feedback, I'm very pleased with where we've landed. Through the SAP plan, we now have an agreement on where council will provide limited intervention and where it will hold the line on the seawater over the short, medium and long term, starting from 2025. And I'm very pleased also that staff have been able to identify funds within existing budgets to implement a range of initiatives between now and 2025 to work towards these goals and to slow down the flooding. So today, I'd like to encourage the committee to please support this plan, which has already been formally endorsed by the Kaipariki Local Board. And again, I'd like to thank everyone who has been involved in this enormous task. Kia ora.
Thank you so much, Chair Gillen. Very concise, and thank you to the local board for your phenomenal work in this space and working with the staff and mana whenua and community to get what I think is a good result. Right, Councillor Watson, the question?
Yes, thank you, John. A good presentation as usual. As a former user of Dudding Park there with back in the day with the Tigers, just curious to know where this all lands in respect of protection of the park. I know in previous years it's been used as a cricket pitch. I think there was an artificial pitch there at one time. Soccer and occasionally there were league teams even training there. So where does that all land, John, in terms of the park protection?
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Well, assuming that the committee today endorses this plan, then going forward, we will be protecting the park, and the actual solution to that will need to be worked out. But this at least will draw a line in the sand that there will be no more inundation of that park, because at the moment not only is the water wearing away at the field surface, but we've got seawater crabs in there eating away at the dirt. We've got various saltwater plants growing over the field, and it also floods, which means that it can't be used a lot of the time. So, but if this plan is endorsed, then we will have agreement between the local board, staff, and council to actually work on finding ways to protect the sports field.
Great, glad to hear it. Thanks, John.
Member Wilson, next question.
Thank you, John, for your presentation. Yes, it was very concise. There's some good stuff in there, and it says that it was developed in the spirit of partnership with mana whenua. I suppose my question is, does the board enjoy that relationship with mana whenua iwi past the SAP?
Yes, although there is a lot of room for improvement, I acknowledge that. But yes, we have been working with mana whenua on that. We've been working with mana whenua on our local park management plan as well, which is currently up for consultation, and we'll also have some input into the future of Little Shoal Bay as well. But there is definitely scope for improving that relationship.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Member Wilson. Mayor Goff.
Yeah, thanks, John, for being here and for your presentation. And I agree that the plan is a good first step. but of course what it doesn't do is consider costs. And we're going to have 20 shoreline adaptation plans, and we're dealing with climate change and more severe weather events and rising sea levels. And this is going to be a hugely expensive process to hold the line. I think we all acknowledge that. I just wondered whether your board had any thoughts about how we should best fund the sort of work that will need to be done to convert the plan into reality.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's a very meaty question for me. No, we haven't put forward any solution to that. That's something that we'll leave up to the governing body to sort out. But what I would like to say, though, is that Little Shoal Bay is an area that is a bit different to these other areas that you will be considering. We have existing infrastructure in place. We also have under the ground there a big question mark over what is there. We think there is a lot of rubbish, a lot of toxic waste and things in there. And if we don't do anything and we allow the seawater to come in, there's a huge risk that will leach into the Waitemata Harbour. We've also got a through road there, which is technically part of the park, but it is used by a lot of the residents in Birkenhead Point and Northcote Point to travel between, and that would need to be converted into a bridge or something. So whichever way we go in Little Shoal Bay, there are going to be huge cost implications. I acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Goff, and I do not believe there are any other questions. So I'll move the acknowledgement there, seconded by Councillor Darby. Thank you very much, Chair Gillen, to you and the board. You're welcome to stay for the discussion, but we can update you afterwards if you're unable to. So thanks again for attending, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right. All those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Right, we'll move straight to it then. The Waimano Little Shoal Bay report. Sorry. Oh, this is not great. I forgot extraordinary business. Is there any extraordinary business? I didn't think so, so I was just skipping over it. Right, to item 8, the Shoreline Adaptation Plan for Waimano Little Shoal Bay. So I think Natasha and Paul are coming up, and if you want to briefly introduce yourselves and maybe the team behind you, if you'd like to just acknowledge them, and then we'll go through the presentation. Thank you.
Atamarie, thank you all for your time. Ko Paul Kleinick toku ingoa. I'm the General Manager for the Resilient Land and Coast Department of Auckland Council. What I propose that we do today, I'm going to pass over to Natasha Carpenter, who's our Coastal Management Practice Lead. She'll introduce the broader project team. Obviously a lot of work going into the Shoreline Adaptation Plan and the future Shoreline Adaptation Plans before we run you through a supporting presentation and receive any questions that you might have. Kia ora.
Morena Koto, ko Natasha Carpenter toku ingoa. I'm the Coastal Management Practice Lead in Resilient Lands and Coasts, and it's our pleasure to be here today to seek approval of the Waimano Little Shoal Bay Mini SAP. And I'd just like to acknowledge that the broader project team, some of whom are sitting behind me today from Resilient Land and Coasts, Community Facilities, Parks and Places and Healthy Waters, our mana whenua partners, the Kaipātiki Local Board, and our supporting consultants. We have a brief presentation for you today just to step through a little bit of a recap of the Shoreline Adaptation Plans, an overview of the Waimano Mini Shoreline Adaptation Plan itself, and some of the next steps in the SAP program. So the Shoreline Adaptation Plans are long-term adaptive plans for the sustainable management of Auckland Council-owned land and assets over the next 100 years. They take into consideration the full suite of coastal hazards from coastal erosion, coastal inundation, rainfall flooding, and the impacts of climate change and how that may change the risk profile of those hazards over time. Combined with understanding the cultural values of mana whenua and the values of the local community, this sets the blueprint for some of the high-level adaptation strategies over time that are developed through the process. The Shoreline Adaptation Plans are obviously a key work stream within Te Taruku Atawhiri and align with the Te Ora o Tamaki Makaurau Wellbeing Framework. The whole program has been designed in the spirit of partnership with Mana Whenua, and through working with the Infrastructure and Environmental Services Kaitiaki Forum, we are guided by a series of operational guiding principles, which includes principles such as being responsive to iwi management plans where available and naturalising the coast where possible. So the work programme itself includes 3 tiers of Mana Whenua engagement, from regional discussions with the Kaitiaki Forum, local iwi engagement on each area-based plan, and then governance discussions with Te Pōtaio. Coastal management is obviously quite a complex topic, and the Shoreline Adaptation Plan work programme reflects that with a number of key work streams. We have Mana Whenua engagement, which is end-to-end throughout the development of each Shoreline Adaptation Plan. The community engagement, trialling a range of different methods, both online and in person, to understand the community values and draft that into a series of objectives to support those high-level management strategies. The technical work stream to understand coastal hazards and their risk profile and how that should inform what's technically feasible. And where appropriate, the infrastructure objectives, so particularly working with the council-controlled organisations, Auckland Transport and Watercare, so that any high-level strategies that are put forward align with their objectives. You'll recall from the Whangaparoa pilot that we have 4 overarching adaptation strategies presented for each plan. These are no active intervention, which is essentially allowing natural processes to continue, so no investment in the maintenance or provision of additional coast protection structures. And this is also the strategy that we've been applying for private property, given the current scope of the Shoreline Adaptation Plan work programme. Limited interventions, so this is really related to limited works to extend the life of existing assets, such as maintenance or localised retreat of assets to improve their resilience to coastal hazards over time. And this strategy really acknowledges that the coast is not fixed in the specific location and includes some more nature-based enhancements, such as dune planting. And we have Hold the Line, which is really geared towards preserving the function of an area. Implementation options include nature-based options such as beach nourishment, or more traditional options such as seawalls. But really the preferred methodology here, aligning with those principles from Mana Whenua, is nature-based options where appropriate. And finally, we have managed realignment, so where we recognise that the risk profile is too high, relocating those assets outside of the hazard zone as far as practicable and allowing that space for coastal processes and reducing our ongoing response costs essentially to coastal hazards and climate change. So to give a brief overview of the Waimano Little Shoal Bay Shoreline Adaptation Plan, you'll all be familiar with the location of Little Shoal Bay on the north shore of the Waitemata Harbour. And this bay was selected for prioritising for a mini shoreline adaptation plan due to its value to local iwi, the local communities, and its exposure to coastal hazards both in the present day and over time. What makes this a mini plan as opposed to what you'll be familiar with from the Whangaparoa pilot is its more localised scale, looking at just this one bay, higher resolution in terms of the detail and the results that you'll see in front of you, more focused community engagement methodologies, and a series of overarching high-level adaptation strategies that are supported by a series of current actions in the more immediate term, so the 0 to 3 year sort of time frame. Mana Whenua engagement started before the official launch of the Shoreline Adaptation Plan in October last year, and was undertaken with all local iwi that expressed an interest in the plan's development, which included Ngāti Whanonga, Te Akatai Waiohua, Ngāti Whātua o Ōraki, and Ngāti Pawa. And engagements consisted of a series of approximately 10 online hui, and some of those joint with members of the Kaipātiki Local Board, and to really understand the Shoreline Adaptation Plan process and the cultural values of this area. And these values have really served as a core foundation to the development of the plan. And this slide is really just to emphasise that some of that higher resolution of the Waimano Little Shoal Bay Shoreline Adaptation Plans, so not just focused on the immediate coastal frontage, but extending into the area further upstream, so Area A, including Leroy's Bush and the surrounding environs, and Section B, looking at the cricket pitch and Dudding Reserve. For community engagement on the Waimano SAP, this was open from the beginning of the year until the middle of March and looked at a range of different engagement methodologies. So we had digital engagement through the AK Have Your Say platform, an online survey, and we also sought individual submissions. For online engagement, we included an informative webinar for the process of the SAP development process and held 2 facilitated online workshops over multiple times, I think 4 times for each workshop, to understand both the values and objectives for the community at Waimano and then translate those through into some of the preferred adaptation strategies. So overall feedback included 405 individual community responses, 19 individual submissions, and each of the facilitated workshops was at full capacity. So here you see an overview of the preferred high-level adaptation strategies across Waimano. And I can draw your attention to we have limited intervention for the coastal environments, so looking at the foreshore and the Leroy's Bush area. And this is really going to focus a lot on some of the planting and enhancement that can be done. And then we have hold the line for some of the further landward assets to preserve their functionality and some of those high values recognised through the community and mana whenua. Each of these high-level strategies is supported by a series of 6 current actions, and these are to be implemented within existing BAU operational budgets within the more immediate 0 to 3 years, whilst the high-level adaptation strategies really sort of commence from 2025 onwards. One of the most critical current actions within those, or the priority there is to complete some quite complex hydrodynamic modelling to understand the interaction between the saltwater and freshwater environments, which will dictate a lot of the detail of the options that will sit behind these strategies in the implementation phase. So in summary, the Mini Shoreline Adaptation Plan presents a series of high-level strategies for the protection and enhancement of the environment. It adopts the Shoreline Adaptation Plan framework in terms of considering coastal hazards, cultural significant areas and community values. The high-level strategies are supported by those high-level current actions, which is something quite different from what we have in the Whangaparaoa pilot. And then obviously specific implementation to implement these high-level strategies will be subject to the regulatory consenting requirements. The Mini Shoreline Adaptation Plan will be embedded within the wider Shoreline Adaptation Plan for Waitemata Harbour when that is scheduled within the programme. And implementation will continue to be a collaborative effort across Council, including sort of working these recommendations into supporting plans, particularly the Local Park Management Plan for Kaipātiki and Coastal Asset Management Planning. And we'll continue to work with mana whenua and across the council teams for these implementations. And just to conclude with the work programme and next steps, so we have 20 individual shoreline adaptation plans scheduled to cover the entire 3,200 kilometres of Auckland's coastline. You have previously heard from us with the Whangaparaoa pilot, which was completed earlier in the year. Obviously with you today for the Waimano Mini Shoreline Adaptation Plan. Anticipate being with you shortly for the Beachlands and East full pilot, second pilot, which is just in the final stages of review with iwi. And we have launched the Awhitu Peninsula and Manukau South Shoreline Adaptation Plans, which began around June. Concurrently with this work, we are completing a regional coastal hazards risk assessment for the entire coast, which will help inform the future rollout of the shoreline adaptation plans around the remainder of the coast. And this regional risk assessment will also support some of the implementation of the SAP. So once all of the coastline is complete, this will help us develop the regional prioritisation schema for the future implementation of each of those high-level strategies. So thank you very much for your time this morning. I'll pass back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, and you can see how comprehensive the work has been and the ongoing work as well. Mayor Goff, first up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I've got a couple of questions, but I'll just create a little bit of context for it, if I may. The default position of local boards, and I'm not just talking about Little Shoal Bay here, we've got 20 of these plans, and this is a mini plan, but the expectations of the local board, the local community and the mana whenua will always be to want to hold the line. You know, if I was in that position, that's what I'd want too, because these are assets for the community. But what worries me about the way in which we've set out this this strategy is that we create expectations that that will be possible. And I doubt, well, I don't doubt, I know that across 20 shoreline adaptation plans, we won't have 20 plans where the recommendations are overwhelmingly hold the line. Your strategies here, it's important to have the strategy and to do the consultation, but strategies are always theoretical until you know what the costs of your strategy will be and what the source of the revenue will be. We don't know the costs when we adapt the strategy, and we certainly don't know the source of the revenue. So my question is really how can we confidently adopt this strategy without knowledge of the cost and the source of the revenue, and the knowledge that this is not just a one-off, this is one of probably hundreds of mini areas that will be affected by climate change and sea level rise. And I suppose attached to that question is, I can understand in the short term we might be able to hold the line, but we're planning out here the medium term and the long term for 50 and 100 years. That seems to me so desperately theoretical that it has no meaning at all, because we don't know yet whether, if the worst of the climate change happens, we're going to be talking about metres of sea level rise. So why are we going for the longer term and pretending that we have a strategy that's called hold the line? And how can we adopt the strategy in good faith until we know what the cost and the source of the revenue will be?
Through the chair, thank you, Mayor Goff. That was a very good question to raise, and there's a few parts of it that we can unpick as we move forward. So I'll start, and as we'll work our way through this, and if we need to, we'll come back to some of the main points of your question. I think you led with an expectation that we might expect most communities to desire hold the line. In our experience, that isn't actually correct. So for Whangaparoa, and within that plan, there are large areas that the community, mana whenua, have accepted needs to be retreated and naturalised over time, which is great. Our current experience through Beachlands and East, which is quite a large area of Auckland's coastline, is the same. So communities wanting to explore opportunity and explore the benefits of naturalisation and retreat. In my experience, I've had the benefit of working with council for 22 years. Communities are changing. Their knowledge and appreciation of climate change is evident in what they're bringing forward. There is an appreciation, especially with some of what's happening with respect to reform of the RMA, national policy statements, that it's unacceptable and not achievable to hardline all of Auckland's 3,200 kilometres of coastline, and that's really been backed by our quite intensive and really, I'd like to say, quite amazing engagement and partnership with mana whenua in this space. So I think for Waimano, Little Shoal Bay, it is a bit of an anomaly that we're talking about holding the line, so much of holding the line, but I think some of the devil is in the detail for the different parts of Waimano and what that means. So it's not speaking to building seawalls everywhere for Waimanoa. It's talking about how we can best manage some of the impacts or changes that we're currently experiencing, what we expect into time. It might involve a little bit of land raising. It might involve a little bit of augmenting some of the drainage requirements in those areas. And that's the sort of work that council does on a pretty regular basis, BAU type of work outside of this type of work. I think it's important as well for council to acknowledge we need to start somewhere with this discussion. And I think what we've been missing for the last, again in my experience, the last 20 years is a guide that directs council, our communities in partnership with mana whenua, what we need to plan for, prepare for, and work towards. Funding's a really key part of this, but it will be difficult to have a discussion around the extent of funding required without completing the 20 SAPs, without completing the regional risk assessment, and without updating our asset management plans that sit in and around coastal assets as well. So there's quite a lot of work that's happening behind the scenes of the shoreline adaptation plans. And again, just keeping in mind that the non-statutory living documents which guide the need to think and work towards a certain position, things may change. Mayor Goff, over time, I expect they will. What we're seeing here is guidance based on the best data and science that we have available for now. I have no doubt when we look 100 years forward, things might be quite different to what they are now. So the plans represent our best knowledge and a balance between community desire and how they value the coast and the environs, and what our specialists are confirming needs to be considered and provided for. But you know, there is a huge challenge in this space, and it involves reference to access and critical infrastructure, roading, wastewater, you know, quite a bit to work through in that space. So I think it's important that we can, with confidence, adopt and approve these shoreline adaptation plans, because they are the start of a journey that involves a lot more detailed discussion with communities and asset owners, and ultimately the governing body. You know, discussions that go all the way back to 2017 when we developed the coastal management framework for Auckland. We spoke to a need to complete an exercise such as this to come back and have a more robust discussion around a funding schema. It's timely that the government are also inputting to this conversation at the moment, and thinking about managed retreat and that big, large question of funding and where that sits. But again, the SAPs give us the ability to at least have a position on what we're working towards for most of our coast, and it will not be hold the line. I expect there to be quite the balance between limited intervention, managed retreat, and then some hold the line in those areas where we feel it's appropriate for now.
If I could just focus in on a supplementary, and the supplementary is really about expectations. In the recommendations, we kind of say it. We say where strategies can be implemented through existing budgets, this will be integrated from now. But where strategies require an additional budget, that'll be subject to regional prioritisation. Now, I think that's an accurate statement in the recommendations. But if I was sitting in the community that has an affection for Shoal Bay, and I absolutely understand why they would, I would read this, and my expectations would be that you would be able to hold the line on all of that. And I don't know whether we can legitimately raise that expectation at this point until we know what the cost is and until we know where the revenue is coming from. And that's my critical question. And you know, you say things will change over time. Yeah, but my fear is that they'll change, and you say it in the paper in different places, more quickly and for the worse. And we don't know, and government hasn't given any indication of how we deal with that sort of adaptation to sea level rise. So I just reiterate my question. It's around, are we unfairly raising expectations, and particularly that we'll be able to do that for 100 years? I mean, yeah, look, you might be able to hold the line for 20 years, but I couldn't look you in the eye and say in 100 years that will be possible, because I fear for the worse, and that it won't be possible. So I really just feel that the paper's a good paper, but it needs to temper expectations with reality. that's my point. I probably won't take a speaking role because I've already made that point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair, maybe just a quick response around maybe some additional clarification that could be added to the report. The current actions that we speak to, or the 6 current actions, are work streams that have been underway for some time, or are envisaged through work programs like our Coastal Assets Renewal Work Program. So they are. It's fair to raise the expectation in the current actions over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. I think it's important when we talk about the short-term management responses of Hold the Line, that is between 2025 and 2045. So these aren't works that we're envisaging or proposing start tomorrow. There is time to work up the detail in that space. Again, on reflection, when we look towards the long term, it's a discussion that we've had about intimating Hold the Line out that far, that things will change. I guess, again, I just want to clarify it's based on our best understanding of the various components of climate change and the impacts for Waimanoa, and our understanding that we could support that management response out to 2085, 2130. But again, as time progresses and the data changes, that may need to be revised. So the Shoreline adaptation plans themselves have a feedback to be revised every 5 or so years. But we've been working with mana whenua to develop another trigger that sits within the SAPs that say it may not be every 5 years, it might be as the circumstance requires. So, you know, in the real world, playing that out for Waimanoa, Little Shoal Bay, a series of infrequent, extremely severe storm events and impacts for that environment would require us to come back and maybe revisit some of the time frames and some of the actions that sit with that. But again, this is our best sort of plan based on what we currently understand, with plenty of opportunity to come back and revise, review.
Thank you, Paul. Member Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. That very interesting kōrero just had. My pātai, the plan gives good guidance and good principles for developing management actions, but the concern would be they don't appear able to require these principles to be implemented or ensure ongoing partnership, although that's one of the primary tenets of the plan. So what is the thinking, please, around ensuring and enabling Council's commitment to ensure, in the spirit of partnership, or that the work is ongoing? What is the thinking around it not being just a document, but more it has action attached to it?
Through the Chair, maybe if I could start with this. So we've got a series of current actions, which will be the first phase of implementation of the Waimano Shoreline Adaptation Plan. We work closely with the Infrastructure and Environmental Services Kaitiaki Forum, which includes each of the members that has been partnering with us on the Little Shoal Bay Shoreline Adaptation Plan. There's the strong interest from mana whenua, particularly in supporting some of the restoration and environmental enhancement. So we'll be reporting back through the forum on those projects as they become live, and working with the forum and adopting a similar model to what we have for the Shoreline Adaptation Plan itself through to implementation. This will also extend through from the Coastal Renewals Work Programme when we look at specific maintenance and renewal options for some of the structures at Little Shoal Bay. Would you like to add?
Thank you. I guess it still remains that it is only guidance and principles. How do you, enshrines too strong a word, how do you ensure that there is ongoing partnership past this term and moving forward, and that it demonstrates Council's commitment to why we have SAPs in the first place and the need for the partnership? How do you ensure that commitment is evident?
Through the chair, we've had the benefit through developing the last few SAPs to spend quite a lot of focused time with mana whenua and iwi representatives across Auckland to further that exact discussion. The commitment is there with mana whenua iwi reps to develop and co-author the shoreline adaptation plans, and I'm looking forward to bringing the Beachlands and East Plan to the new committee in the new year, because the style and the format of that report is very heavily influenced by mana whenua's inputs, and it speaks to the future need within the partnership space to not only continue consultation around revision of the SAPs as that's required, but also with respect to every action and every piece of work that the SAPs direct. So we have a keen understanding of mana whenua's role in respect of any physical works, any planning that we complete in this space, and I guess outside but supporting the SAPs is an enduring discussion that we are having at the operational forum about how we improve the partnership with mana whenua in the coastal management space with respect to mana whenua and the council family. So we are working through some options and ways to better engage at, for lack of a better way of explaining it, step 0 instead of step 10 of the process. So more discussions around not just engaging with mana whenua when a resource consent application is required or we need feedback, but having mana whenua with us from the start of the journey right through the planning of all of these projects through to delivery. So the Beachlands and East SAP will be easier to speak to and reference that engagement. And as we come back into Waitemata and the broader area for Kapariki and complete that shoreline adaptation plan, you'll see a bit more reference to how we intend to ensure that continues moving forward. So we're putting a lot of time into the partnership at the moment, and rightly so. I would like to say I think that the relationship in this space is a lot better and much improved from a coastal management perspective, and we don't want to lose momentum in that space. So.
Thank you. One last question, if I may, Mr. Chair. The partnership sits at a governance level, and you're talking about INES, which is an operational level. How are you closing the gap on being able to get some decision making through a governance mana whenua forum?
Through the chair, a very good question. I think that's a bit of a broader question that I probably need to come back to members on. There's quite a bit happening in that space. We are focused here on a coastal piece of work, but well aware of the multitude of things that our directorate is progressing. I think there needs to be a better connection with the governance level and some better clarity around when and how we engage at the governance level versus when and how we engage at an operational level, and then how we take that guidance and engage with iwi on the ground. I think my experience is there's still a little bit of a disconnect through some of those levels, from governance through to operations to on the ground, and some of the local meetings, wānanga, that we have. So I know there's a bit of work happening in that space. Currently, we're happy to contribute to that. Just a reminder, in this space for the SAPs, we have been up and through governance, through the operational, more regular engagement in huis, and we find ourselves at the moment having more on the ground engagement. And we've just come out of a wānanga yesterday, Tuesday actually, at Omapui Marae with Naitaiki Tamaki, reinforcing some of those more focused discussions. But yeah, I think the best I can do is support that there needs to be a bit of a better guide as to governance through operations to on the ground work, and yeah, I'm happy to be part of that conversation.
Thank you. Look, just in the spirit of being helpful, the Secretariat IMSB is always available to aid and support in whatever manner you see fit. Thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Member Wilson. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I have similar concerns as the Mayor in terms of the plan. I wondered whether it was an opportunity, these plans, to actually have that wider discussion, because in the end, we probably won't be able to hold the line. And hold the line might have natural responses, but also things like building seawalls are really expensive and they don't last forever. So has there been a thought around these plans where we start to have that wider conversation? Because you said that further work needs to be done on things like infrastructure, like roading, pipes, etc., parks, because maybe they'll have to be moved, you might need to find new places. Is it better to actually be saying in these plans that this is actually temporary? Because it is, isn't it? You know, if we have sea level, that's what I'm concerned about. And I've got another question as well, but I just, you know, these are not permanent fixes. They are holding the line, is holding it until we can't hold it anymore. But my concern is that we give this expectation that we'll just keep holding the line forever. And my experience has been in one of my areas, the community hated it when it was the local board said, let's go for natural realignment. They said, no, you've got to build the wall. And they had to build the wall. Great expense.
Through the chair, another great question, and it does speak to the need to spend more time in the space of council's role and affordability with respect to coastal management, especially for Auckland. We have the benefit of being part of the broader discussions in this space across New Zealand with other councils, also through the New Zealand Coastal Society. This is a really hot topic. And I want to reinforce the fact that the SAPs are a non-statutory living document for that very reason. The SAPs are structured in a way that they can be revised, they can be adjusted as more and better data and information comes online. But I feel, having reflected on Mayor Goff's question and your question, Councillor Cooper, I really feel, and I look forward to being able to have a broader discussion around affordability and how we prioritise our responses as a council to our communities of Auckland. But we do need to have in place certain key information and reports. And I just want to reiterate that the SAPs, again, the 20 SAPs is only one part of what we need to have, or to be able to present and discuss to inform the funding requirement affordability discussion. So it's not only the SAPs, but we need to complete the regional risk assessment for Auckland. You've heard Natasha speak to that. That's a way of that's a way of evaluating and assessing natural hazard risk, climate change risk, and how it impacts the different areas of Auckland in different ways. That will give us an ability to look at where we need to focus our efforts when we apply the SAP overlays as well. That looks at a range of social, economic, social deprivation, extent of development, proximity of development factors, and we're very close with completing that piece of work. It's a huge undertaking for Tamaki Makaurau when you look at the extent of our coastline. But we also need to complete a revision to our asset management plans in this space. I think it's fair to say our asset management plans for coastal assets and assets within the coastal environment could be improved. So we're committed to actually updating those plans over the next year or two, and those AMPs will be, well, the updates to those AMPs will be supported by other work that's happening in this space as well, Councillor Cooper. So things like areas of Auckland susceptible to coastal erosion, and that piece of work that we completed a year or two ago. We've just committed to a new piece of work around rerunning our LiDAR for Auckland's coast, so some more oblique LiDAR around our coast that'll give us a better appreciation of the current state of our coast and help inform the current state of our assets. We shouldn't discount that SAPs sit at a very high level and direct the need to do more of what we're discussing today, but we need some more of the focused information and data to really lean into the discussion around affordability. We are only currently really getting a handle on the state of our coastal assets. It's a reasonable asset base as well. So whilst we plan for the future and what we need to do, we also need to have one hand on our current requirements as an asset owner. We're talking about $1.1 billion worth of coastal assets with a reasonably small renewal budget of $10 million a year. So there is a discussion that we need to have in that space. And working with my team, what we're proposing to do is actually come back to the relevant committee in the new year after elections and have a bit more of a workshop in this space based on what we know about what we currently own and risk that our current assets are subject to, what the revised data is telling us from a need to prepare better into the future perspective. And by that time as well, we would have hopefully completed another 2 shoreline adaptation plans, so we'll have a bit more of a broader Auckland to speak to. But again, just my final point, the trend that I'm seeing through the SAPs that are complete at Whangaparoa and Beachlands and East is much more of a trend leaning towards managed realignment and limited intervention, not a one-trick pony from a hold the line, build seawalls. I really am seeing a change in our communities, and especially through mana whenua leading, a lot more reference to wanting to work with nature and not fight against nature. I think it's timely we're having the discussion now with where the SAPs are and where central government is with progressing some of their thinking as well, because I think it's all going to come together at about the right time. But we're not shying away from the challenge ahead. I can't give the answers around exactly how much this is going to cost and who pays. And just a reminder, this is a conversation focused on public land and public assets. There's another big piece to this, which is private land, private assets, how that's managed, and council's role as a regulator in that space as well. The SAPs, where they can seek to show that council can walk the talk in many respects, in respect of doing what we should be doing more of, which is working with the environment. That is always our preference. Maybe I should have led with that, actually, just a bit of clarification around coastal practitioners currently are always looking for options to work with nature, not necessarily against it. And when we talk about seawalls or hold the line, they often come with a tag in and around useful life and consent duration, which is getting less and less over time as well.
Thank you. And just a supplementary, Mr. Chair. So I think you're probably right in general. People are realising that, you know, we need to go more with nature, but the rub comes when it's private property, understandably. Now, the other question just is, with recommendation C3 around it being a regional prioritisation process, were there any discussions with local board as local landowners for a lot of this land and parks and the ability to make the decisions for those areas around striking a local rate to supplement any regional budget, given the importance to local communities?
Through the chair, those discussions have come up. I think it's probably fair to say that boards generally would make reference to looking to the governing body to help lead some of the regional discussion in this space. Rates, targeted rates, have been raised. I think some of the boards that we've worked with have had the experience, or some of the members that have been in and around council for quite some time have had the experience of applying targeted rates for things that relate to coastal management. It hasn't gone down very well in the past, so they're a little bit not willing to lead that discussion, but probably in general more of a reference to looking to the regional position on council's approach and affordability. So we haven't really landed that or gone too deep with that conversation.
Thank you.
The board did consult on a targeted rate in the 10-year budget, but it was pretty high level. It said stop flooding or something in Little Shoal Bay, and the feedback was mixed, and so the local board didn't progress anything from there. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Paul and team, for your work. This is not easy stuff, is it? We've got the sea level rising, and we've also got the tectonic plates pushing the west coast up and the east coast down. And that's actually having a far greater effect than sea level rise, quite frankly, to multiple between 5 and 10. My concern here, and I'll be absolutely honest about it, is the equity and consistency. You've got a large chunk of hold the line from cricket pitches, abutments, road reserve, beachfronts, and a boatyard, whereas in truth, Little Shoal Bay's at sea level anyway, virtually, been there a few times. And I'm concerned that the equity part and the precedent part is not reflected thoroughly enough in this report. And a lot of people, other people with assets such as Imapura Marae, the coastal park assets at Maraetai, White Patch, the clifftop parkland and houses at Beachlands, which are going to end up in the tide. The Whitu Peninsula and coastline, they all have expectations of hold the line for the next 50, 60, 75 years. And the reality is that's not going to be affordable. You can talk about producing budgets as much as you like, but it's just not, people will not. This community, which is relatively well off, did not want to do a targeted rate. Council's got to fix, and so everyone's got to pay. But the quantum of this is so great, I just do not see how it can be done. I really don't. So my question is have you considered the equity lens and the pragmatic fairness and precedent setting when this report was put forward? And I commend you for it, but I'm having trouble with it.
Through the chair, yes, we have. I think the piece I spoke to around the regional risk assessment especially speaks to some of the equity considerations, socio-economic considerations. I think the line of questioning in this space relates to a local community and some of what's been most desired for this local community, but I need to balance that with some of the influence with the technical specialists that have been involved with this as well. So there is a blend for the Waimano report around what we think is practical, achievable, and appropriate for this location. Not necessarily overly influenced by community demand. This process followed the same process as every SAP, which was to engage with community and mana whenua in a way that we explored values and use. And I think the discussions in this space helped us understand the range of use across not only the local community and the local residents for Waimano, but also we had a very good appreciation now of those that come to this location for that use. So when we talk about holding the line in this instance for Waimano, I'd like us to move away from thinking of just seawalls and hard defences, which are expensive to build, expensive to maintain, and not easily justifiable. We're talking about a range of options here. We're talking about the treatment of drainage systems. We're talking about bunding and sculpting of land levels, which are already augmented because it's reclamation in the back of Waimano. So we're also not giving necessarily, and I know that might not be coming across in the long-term management strategy, an indication that things will be that way forever. And Natasha talked to a very important point in the current actions or the short-term actions that we've committed to over 2022 to 2025. That complex modelling that we want to do to understand the interface between freshwater and saltwater, sea, inundation and flooding will give us a better guide as to what can be achieved, and possibly will guide some influence on the medium and longer term management responses here as well. So we're missing that piece of work. It's a pretty detailed piece of work. But equity and fairness, same type of conversation we're having across all of Auckland. And it's nice that you mentioned Umapuia Marae, and that's exactly where we've just come from, and we understand a lot of the issues really well in Beachlands and East. And the original intent was to bring both SAPs to today's committee. Unfortunately, there's just a little bit of, well, not unfortunately, the requirement is just for a little bit more engagement between Ngāi Tamaki and Ngāti Paoa. So we're just working through a little bit of the cultural inputs for that plan. When you read that report, you'll see quite a lot of reference to retreat, naturalisation, realignment, and hold the line, not just for areas where there is a specific need for critical infrastructure, but also to better help protect and manage sites of cultural significance. So I'm not seeing a distinction or disparity with how we're engaging with communities and what's coming through in the plans. I think it's fair to say for Little Shoal Bay, Waimano are probably the highest level of input for any coastal project in my 20 years. So just a huge amount of interest in respect of what council might be thinking of actioning in that space. So quite a bit of misinformation circulated, but yeah, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing equity in the way that the process is undertaken. But I acknowledge again, and I'd be the first to admit, the discussion around affordability, funding, and risk for council is real. It is a really, really meaty conversation. I think I had the benefit, Councillor Cashmore, of quite early discussions in 2018, 2019, when these sorts of discussions were raised around affordability and funding and what was required of council. The instruction that I received was, when you come back to lead that conversation, we want to see good information, good data, and good research, because at the time we were having a discussion about the level of asset renewal funding, coastal renewal funding that was required. And we did have that discussion and sought that level of funding with a bit of a rider that it was based on some pretty high level information, but we needed to go a little bit deeper. And I see SAPS as an important piece of what we need to bring back to the committee to help drive these conversations. And keep in mind that the SAPS will be completed. They will instruct and map a variety of management strategies over timeframes. But when we have the broader discussion about overlaying some of the funding, it won't discount our ability to say, and using the regional risk assessment as a guide to say, this is where council is going to prioritise its spend. It's going to be here, and it's going to be there, and it's going to be over here, but it might not be, equally spread across the region, and that's just the nature of what we need to consider. Not all of Auckland, luckily enough, is subject to urgent and immediate risk. That means we've got the time to work through these conversations. There are other areas of New Zealand that don't have the time, and they're grappling right here, right now with these sorts of discussions, and that they're coming up with recommendations, decisions, and levels of funding that I would say are informed by not as robust thinking and research as we're trying to complete here.
Natasha, did you have something to add?
Oh yes, if I may, through the chair, I just wanted to, and I hope this will help answer your question somewhat, but I just wanted to reflect on the lessons learnt. Waimano has been unique in that it's been a mini shoreline adaptation plan, and I think some of the lessons learnt through that are the challenges of looking at a site-specific area. It has prompted a lot more focus on the detail of the specific assets and their function within Waimano, in contrast to the wider Shoreline Adaptation Plan programme where we're looking at large coastal cells. I think that enables, from my perspective, some balance in terms of what we're looking at in the context of the regional risk assessment. So that I think has been really useful to learn and understand through looking at the full pilots that we've had and the mini shoreline adaptation plan for Waimano.
Thank you. Thank you, Natasha. You must have read my mind, because I was about to say that. And I think that's important for the questions coming up, is that this is probably going to be one of the only, at this stage, many quite focused plans. So Whangaparoa, Beachlands, Maraitai, they're quite large, and there will be bits like Little Shoal Bay and all of those larger studies that will be hold the line, but there'll be parts in the Kaipatiki Upper Harbour sort of overall plan that comes in the next couple of years that will be managed retreat and different parts of that. It's just that this, because there was so much interest, we pushed forward to have a look at a mini plan to give those more direct answers. So it looks like there's a lot more hold the line, but this is because it's such a small focused area with so many assets like a road and recreation and a bunch of other things too. I'll probably add more in my speaking turn, but I think it also that there was members of the community that wanted far more structures put in place to hold back seawater, etc., and the team have been very clear that is not the intention. And some of the other things in here, it's about the nuisance flooding. There isn't actually at the moment solutions for the overall larger king tides and storms and things like that. So it's trying to find that balance at the moment. Councillor Darby.
Thanks. Look, I think we've sort of canvassed this, and I think I've got my head around it, but I'm looking at the C Roman 1 and 2. So there's going to be a lot of expectation once we approve this today. There's expectation that under that C1 that council will be doing something quite quickly, but that's possibly not the case. So can you just, I understand the wording there, it's about integrating the adaptive strategies into the asset management plans. Is there an assumption there that when you do that within existing budgets, you are also making available those budgets for physical works? And is that C1 ahead of resolving the other shoreline adaptation plans, and in the absence of a prioritisation process?
Through the chair, just to clarify, table 2 within the within your notes there for the shoreline adaptation plan, it does speak to current actions, and I think that's causing a little bit of confusion in this space. Not only is Waimano as a mini SAP slightly different to normal SAPs, within this SAP we've also agreed to some current actions, and the reason that we've done that is the current actions reflected here speak to some of what was being raised when we were having the discussion for the SAP, but it related to work that was either underway or planned to start. It was already captured in the Coastal Asset Renewals Work Programme. It was already being envisaged by Customer Community Services for some of how they're managing the sports field or park areas in that space. So table 2 and the list of those 6 actions and the reference to utilising current budgets, just to explain that a little bit better, there's a range of commitment across my department, Healthy Waters, Customer and Community Services, to do some work that is already envisaged, already within their work programs, already budgeted for, either OPEX or CAPEX as part of other things that are happening. We thought it was just really important to capture those current actions for a couple of reasons. I think that they were what was being raised in that space was becoming a little bit of a distraction to engaging with community and mana whenua around some of the longer term planning and visioning. A lot of the community wanted to come back and talk about, but what's happening with the stairs, what's happening with the little groin, what's happening with our seawall. So we've captured them in that list, put them to the side, clarified that there is funding to progress a lot of that work, either the planning and design or right through from the planning design and actually implementation. So you'll see reference in point or item 5 around the seawall and inundation. That is a project already in the Coastal Asset Renewals Work Programme that we're mid-flight on or engaged doing the design. So I think the other point there is to complete the SAP, complete the planning and the thinking, and complete the AMP, so that can again better inform some of the future funding decisions, requirements.
Okay, that's a lot clearer, thanks.
Thank you. And last question, Councillor Watson.
Just want to pick up on the officer's comments to do with striking a balanced and a practical approach. And I say this in the context of having been through the Whangaproa pilot, where, as Paul Kleinak has said, huge big parts of Whangaproa essentially just left to natural processes. In any given area, though, Paul, and I think particularly of Little Shoal Bay here, where you have, an accumulation of council assets, in this case we've got the only other major road that other than Ottawa Road that links into Birkenhead and Birkdale and Beach Haven, playgrounds, sports fields, tennis courts, walks, etc., etc. It it surely means that in those areas, opposed to some of the other coastal areas where you don't have the concentration of council assets, where you don't have the population using them, then inevitably it requires a different assessment and a different weighing up of priorities, and that, you know, that priorities will become clearer over the passage of time, whether something is imminent, whether it might have a 10, 20, 30-year lifespan. So all those sort of details surely have to be fed into any decision-making process like this. Whereas for some areas, it's not an issue because you don't have that, you know, value to the community concentrated on a whole number of fronts in the one area. So am I right in assuming that with the passage of time, this sort of information and analysis will then be much better able to feed into the various weighing up of whether, you know, X amount of dollars goes here or it doesn't? But that if you don't do this work, if you don't assess some different layers of value, then you're kind of leading yourself down the wrong path in terms of saying, well, you know, everywhere is the same, everyone has the same value. It doesn't. These sorts of pockets are quite identifiable and quite different from huge other parts of the coastline. Is that a reasonable summation?
Through the chair, kia ora, Councillor Watson. Yes, that is a fair observation and comment, and I think that's accurate. You know, Tamaki Makaurau is an extraordinarily complex area to have a hand in managing. Our communities are quite diverse, very different in their needs and requirements. And I think some of the future challenge, I was just thinking to myself, the difference between somewhere like Tamaki Drive versus the Umapuia Coast Road, for example. You know, decisions need to be made in and around in time about how we manage that type of infrastructure and that type of access. In some locations, it might be a slightly easier discussion because we've got the ability to relocate infrastructure, reroute roads, for example. In other environments, it's going to become increasingly challenging, and I think the trap that we don't want to fall into, or that we want to make sure that we have an adequate trigger developed in, is you can only hold the line and you can only manage against nature for so long, and the SAPs are trying to find and acknowledge that in the future, often management responses need to change, but importantly, we need to work with our different communities around what those triggers are to enact that change. And yeah, that's complex and it's tricky. But I think that the SAPs give us the baseline to move into more detailed discussions around more detailed projects, and I think that will become clearer over time.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. And probably last question from me, and thank you for taking my calls and feedback and concerns on this for some time. And I think, isn't the purpose and the reason why we funded this through the 10-year budget to stop, because we are funding lots of coastal assets in an ad hoc way right now. This is not a plan to do stuff. We're already kind of funding things without a strategy or plan. And this is the whole intention, is that slowly we'll figure out what we need to protect and what we can't. Because we're not going to let everything go all at once, but so I guess confirmation that isn't this why we're doing these plans and why we funded them? Because they weren't funded 2 years ago. There was none of this work that could be done.
No, that's through the chair. That's a very good point, a very important point. I think what the SAPs give council from a coastal management practitioner perspective is, for the first time, when Auckland's coastline experiences not just the incremental effects of climate change, which are a little harder to see on a day-to-day basis, but more importantly after an infrequent severe storm event. And I had the privilege of travelling Auckland's east coast with Mayor Goff after a pretty severe storm event a few years ago, community to community, having discussions around what had happened, why we thought it had happened in that way, and the magnitude of that storm event. And it was quickly followed by a line of questioning around, so what are you going to do about this? And what is council's plan? And we've never had the ability to pick up something that's like a SAP to say, actually, we've got a shoreline adaptation plan for this area. It talks about coastal processes. It talks about incremental change. It talks about effects of infrequent storm events. And guess what? In the short term, it envisages that we might need to, for example, retreat an area of our coastline. And if we had that plan in place, and we'd work through those discussions with our communities and mana whenua, and we wanted to retreat or naturalise a part of the coastline, and we were having a discussion on site where a seawall had failed, and this happened multiple times on the tour down the east coast, I would have been able to refer to the SAP and say, look, we're not going to rebuild that asset, we're actually going to remove that asset and we're going to naturalise, and the SAP supports that approach, and also the SAP outlines the community's support, mana whenua's support to go down this road. So it is a massive leap forward from a coastal management perspective to obviate and reduce a lot of the ad hoc knee-jerk responses. It's been really, really tough for us as engineers and scientists leading some of these discussions with the community, resisting our advances to want to retreat and naturalise a bit of coastline without saying, where's the evidence, where's the data, you haven't talked to us, where's the conversation? So yeah, SAPs fit into that space, and yeah, will provide a really important guide and foundational approach.
Thank you. That's the end of questions. I'll get you both to move away from the table so you're not entering into the debate, but just want to acknowledge all of you and your teams for the significant work, not just on Waimano or Little Shoal Bay, but I know that it's really ramping up, but actually getting evidence and community and all, and working in partnership with mana whenua, while also dealing with complex laws that continue to change as you roll these out. So thank you. Right, I've moved this, and Councillor Darby has seconded. Seconded? Is that correct wording? Yes. I'll go straight to Councillor Watson for speaking turn.
Yeah, I'd really just like to endorse the approach that the officers have recommended to us with respect of Little Shoal Bay. It's not in my ward, of course, but I am familiar with this approach in respect of what's happened with the Whangapraia pilot, which again what involved a lot of communication with the community, but unlike the instance here with Little Shoal Bay, it was quite a different response that came back in terms of what was the most appropriate way forward in the future. In instances like this one, where we're moving more towards site-specific adaptive strategy, I think it's really important that you actually take some sense of what those particular assets are, that and specifically when they are concentrated, as is the case here, where we have a very major roading network that goes through there, and that in terms of the transport network is really important as a backup to Onawa Road. We have sports fields, we have a very significant playground and picnic spot that serves a much wider area than just Northcote and Birkenhead. We have a bowling club, we have tennis court, we have basketball court, etc., etc. And what we have just over the rise is a massive intensification occurring in the Northcote area in terms of Kaingaora and other residential development. So that hugely growing community, Little Shoal Bay is an access point to the coast, to those facilities, the nearest one, and connected by a very expensive cycleway that was put in a few years ago. So in those instances, then obviously a more pragmatic, balanced approach needs to be taken in terms of weighing up the relative value and investment that may or may not be needed in any given timeline. So, I think that balance has been struck in this instance. and as I said, the adaptation plans will vary quite markedly from area to area, and as a consequence, so will the investment. But the notion that you might just sort of say, oh well, this is coming, it's too big, we can't afford this, we can't afford that. Well, that's really not going to be reflected in site-specific examinations as occurred here, as to A, what has to be done, and B, the value of protecting what is already there for whatever length of time might seem more accurate at that stage. So I guess, Mr. Chair, it's a long way round of saying that, I think this is a pretty thorough report and recommendation that's been presented to us today, and I think in respect of Little Shoal Bay, it's certainly one that is striking the right balance at this stage, and that that should be continued as a result. And similarly, when other areas come up from the other adaptation studies, then there'll be either a kind of Whangaproa type approach, or there might be a Little Shoal Bay type of approach. But I don't think it's not the one size fits all. It's got to be site specific. There's got to be this sort of evaluation. Otherwise, we'll end up with some perverse outcomes. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I will round up if you wanted to speak.
Look, just briefly, I think a lot has been covered here, and I acknowledge the work that's been done here by Paul and Natasha, and they've done it with mana whenua, and they will continue to do it with mana whenua as well. And I think there's an enormous opportunity here for us as a council to take that cultural perspective and get much better outcomes for Auckland. But look, I just want to say, Chair, I know this is, in your patch and my patch. I just want to acknowledge your work in getting this work up. I wouldn't suggest that, the Waimano project has got any jump start on all the others that are in the adaptation plan list. It's just that this one has already had a lot of life to it, and it had a lot of community engagement. I want to acknowledge the local board for their participation in this. And then there's been some real passionate environmentalists, that is, other than yourself, Chair. People like Kyle Aitken, who's been emailing us for quite a few years now, really engaged. So people like that, and there are others as well, which I won't run through the names. But look, we have a situation here where there's been inundation for years, and it's going to be accelerated now at a real rate of knots, nautical knots. While I'm happy to see the response in the different categories, I can't help but think it's going to change quite dramatically as well as we get into it, and the Mayor's alluded to that. But look, you can't go spending money willy-nilly unless you have a strategy, this is the first of a number. This is going to be a very challenging course for the council. It's going to be enormously challenging, but there is terrific creative opportunity here as well. I think this is going to bring the best out of our thinking on how we can adapt. And I think natural processes are going to really come to the fore like never before. But thanks, Chair. Thanks for your work on this, and it's a very early starting block outcome, this one.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Darby. Last speaker before me, Mayor Goff.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll keep it brief because I've made some of the points already. Look, I first of all want to thank Paul and Natasha and the team. There's a hell of a lot of work gone into this, and thank you for reminding me of the trip that we did around the coast. And it was that trip and my knowledge of that area that the Deputy Mayor talked about that indicates to me the scale of what climate change and rising sea levels is going to mean. And I don't think there is yet in our wider community an appreciation of that scale and of the cost. And we're not just talking about the public assets that are part of this paper, but as Paul alluded to, we're talking about private property and private assets, and that will run into billions of dollars. And neither the government nor the communities nor we have worked out yet how we're going to deal with that. And it is a reality. It's happening now, and we have to deal with it. So absolutely endorse the idea of having a shoreline adaptation plan. You cannot deal with this in an ad hoc way, so you have to do it across the board. I have no problem with that. We need a strategy, we need an overview to determine where we're going to hold the line, where we're going to have, it's a new name now, I think, managed realignment. It used to be called retreat, but that has the sense of a military defeat, so we've probably changed the name accordingly, and where we might need limited intervention. But I go back to my original point, Mr. Chair, and when we have these discussions with our communities, it is really important that we do not raise unrealistic expectations, because I'm pleased that some of the acknowledgement among communities is that yes, we cannot, I think you used the term, you've got to work with nature, not against it. But it still seems to me that where there is private property involved, people will have the anticipation that council should be on the front line of protecting their property against rising sea levels. And kind of a King Canute comes to mind there. We can do some things, we will have to do some things, but there are a whole lot of things that we won't be able to do. So can I just urge two things? One, when we have the discussions with communities, we do raise the issue of this isn't unique to their community, it's right across the city and right across the country. We've got to work out what the costs are, we will have to prioritise, and we need to know where the revenue's coming from. Because the targeted rate proposal that you referred to, Mr. Chair, yeah, look, everybody wants to go to heaven and nobody wants to die. Everybody wants to have that protection put in place, but, you know, we all know, actually, the only place that revenue comes from is from us, as ratepayers and taxpayers. And, you know, I would just urge, you know, on the slide there, the impression that, you know, when you say hold the line medium and long term, talking about 100 years, and then it says delivery will be accommodated by existing budgets. I think that's a little misleading. We need to say, actually, we've got to think long term, but we have no idea whether we will be able to hold the line longer term, and actually, on the balance of probabilities, we won't be able to. So when we do the short term investment, we need to make sure that it's not so short term that sooner or later we'll spend the money and then we have to abandon the project. So, you know, thank you very much for all the work that's gone into it. I'll be supporting the paper, but I have those caveats that I hope you take on board. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor Goff. There are no more speakers, so I'll just finish up on this. I do want to acknowledge, first of all, mana whenua for being so engaged in this process and being engaged constantly through the other shoreline adaptation plans so far. It is only going to work across our coast if we ensure we're working in partnership with mana whenua and the original, you know, kaitiaki of these spaces are restored, because when we're talking about the environment and many of the ideas mana whenua have had for centuries is quite a bit different than physical infrastructure, which, as we've seen through that storm Mayor Goff talks about, I think it was 150 slips and assets that were smashed apart in that 2017-18 time, and that's just on public land. So this is why the teams involved have been so passionate about the shoreline adaptation plans, because we need to plan, because we are spending millions of dollars each year on fixing, addressing, removing, replacing coastal assets that, you know, in a couple of years later are getting smashed again by the next large storm. This is slightly different than the other plans, and the reason is because we went for the mini shoreline adaptation plan here because of the interest, because of the many requests, because of the confusion, because of the ad hoc nature, and sometimes the conflicting nature of projects and requests in the Waimano, Little Shoal Bay area. So it was crucial before we did any more actions that we got this up over the line before we continue to spend money on trying to patch up little bits. The other thing, if you've been to Little Shoal Bay, not all of it is inundated, not all of it is underwater. There are actually the eastern side and a lot of the recreation areas, playground, different parts of the bay which are not at risk anytime soon. They're quite considerably higher than other parts. It's confusing. A lot of people think when there's the high tides or rain that it's always seawater that floods, but often it's actually stormwater inundation from the back and the low-lying areas that fill up. So it's not a simple thing of putting up a magical seawall, because then you're probably going to create a bathtub effect of the whole reserve too. So it's ensuring we're thinking about all the water, whether it's coming in or going out, or as we find when there's storms, we often get high tides at the same time, and you've created that bathtub anyway. The community have been really passionate, very vocal, which is awesome. It's very good that we have a community that is willing to speak up for what it wants to protect. Not all those views were shared with each other, but I think it's been a great process for the community to listen to each other, understand mana whenua, understand the laws coming through, like the MPS, freshwater, and what we can and cannot do in that space. There was some concern and maybe slight misinformation that there was a suggestion that council were going to turn the space into something such as a wetland or a mangrove swamp. That was never the case, but it did have to be part of the discussion. The staff were very transparent about what the future could look like. It wasn't simply turning something into something, but it might be what we do to protect or not protect certain areas. It is crucial that we protect the wetlands. There aren't many wetlands left in our city, both saltwater and freshwater, and those are huge for climate benefits, mitigation, but also the species that we do not have in many of our bays and shores anymore that are present in Waimano, Little Shoal Bay. There is an extra focus here, and we will see when we do the full shoreline adaptation plan for this area, there will be areas where we do not and cannot protect anymore. But when we think of Little Shoal Bay, it is a multifaceted community benefit. You've got the access road, you've got recreation space, you've got playgrounds, you've got access to the water, you've got some of the most interesting ecological habitat on the shore at least, but maybe even Tamaki Makaurau, that does need protection, it does need focus. So I guess that is why this is important to hold the line in certain areas, but also the community now know we are not going to be building massive structures to protect things which actually have adverse effects. But we will still be managing, we'll still be upgrading, we'll still be improving the assets in that area and trying our best to improve that space, while also acknowledging, I think when people know when king tides and storms hit during king tides, there isn't a lot we can do right across Auckland in that space. I want to acknowledge the local board. I know there was some concern from the local board about what this meant at the beginning, but they've worked really in partnership with the staff, mana whenua, the community, to get the results. And I know maybe not everything they wanted was locked in here, but they've been, and as you hear from Chair John Gillen, they've been very happy with the process and the conclusion and the outcomes going forward. I think I understand the questions and the concerns from the committee about what the expectations the community will have very long term, but I think that is a constant conversation that will be had. But with what the information we have now, this is a very clear, well thought out plan that is protecting all the parts that I think the community largely want to protect in this area. I want to thank the Mayor and the councillors and IMSB members for the budget. I mean, I remember Paul discussing this. I kept saying, why aren't we doing this, that, and the other? And you were very clear to me that, well, we didn't have the budget to do it, and it's very complex. So to get those climate initiatives into the 10-year budget during what was a very, very difficult time for our finances, we saw this as a priority, and everyone, nearly everyone around our table supported that budget getting in to look at the public land. Private land and through the adaptation plan from government is going to be another conversation altogether, but at least this makes it clear where our priority is and ensuring we don't waste money without a plan patching up our coastline. So that's all I have to say on that. I'm really excited about what comes next. It's a shame that we couldn't get the beachlands, maraetai, SAP up today, but I understand there's a bit more work to do. Mana whenua are keen to get this right as well. So that will come in the next month or two or to the next committee. And that's the important thing. We don't want to rush these things either. But that would have given a bit more context to what the overall areas alike, as well as mini ones like this. So, kia ora, thank you very much. I will go all those in favour.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Is there anyone opposed?
Aye.
No. Thank you very much. Awesome. We will move to a 5-minute break. I've got some cake and lollies and things for the last committee if anyone would like to grab some. Go to the bathroom, have a cup of tea, and we'll see you in, well, 10 minutes. 5 minutes. Thank you. I think nearly everyone's back. We'll move to item 9, amendment to the Auckland Waste Management and Minimization Plan. We have Sarah. Thank you very much. Cool. If you just want to briefly, there's no presentation for this one, is there? No. If you just want to briefly go over the report and resolutions quickly, but we can move to, I think it's pretty straightforward.
Tēnā koutou katoa. So thank you for the opportunity to come here and bring this paper to you. So this is essentially a procedural item, so we don't have a presentation. And it's the resolutions are to give effect to the earlier decision of the governing body around the amendments to the waste plan. You'll see in attachments, so the proposed amendment, I'll just remind councillors of that, was to adopt a region-wide rates-funded system for curbside refuse collections. And this was consulted on with public and through workshops with yourselves over the past year, and with the public as part of the annual budget. So it was the proposal received a clear majority of support, and then through the various workshops and committees we had in the time intervening, we came to a decision by the governing body to agree to the change to the waste plan to give effect to that change. So in attachments B and D, you'll see there we've stepped out the specific changes to the plan, and attachments A and C are the amended waste plan and the corresponding amended Gulf Islands plans, which will be then posted on the website should this resolution pass today.
Thank you very much. My only question was if there's been any more movement on the low user structure or whatever we might put in for the monthly.
Through the chair, yes, we are working through what practically that could look like from a customer and operational perspective, and we're talking to our contracted suppliers about how we can best put that through. So whether that looks like, what that looks like in terms of volume, availability, price, and how we can affect that to the best way possible.
Kia ora, thank you. Member Wilson.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Just one of what can you indicate what some of the key issues mana whenua submissions talk to, and how or if the proposed amendments to the waste plan address any of those?
Through the chair, the through the consultation, mana whenua the mana whenua or Māori organisations supported the proposed change. We had a lot of support from local board areas that where there are large Māori populations, but in terms of mana whenua specifically, we work closely with the Infrastructure and Environmental Services mana whenua Katiaki Forum, and there were indications around the ability of larger families to cope with the changes, but these are largely in rates funded areas, so they were broadly supportive of the changes that we are proposing.
Thank you, and just to clarify if I can, so those submissions that were put through by mana whenua, were there some of those amendments that are included in the plan, were they included or were they advised or anything? The submissions were quite strong, I understand, so it's just curious.
This was quite a specific change around the funding mechanism, the way in which people pay for their curbside services. So we didn't have any specific direction on changes to the service itself from mana whenua in relation to that. What we did have was broad support for staying rates funded or moving to rates funded from the PAYT area, so a support from mana whenua for a rates funded curbside service, and that's quite specifically what this change was around. We are more broadly in consultation with or in partnering with mana whenua as we move forward into our next waste plan. So any broader concerns that mana whenua have will be taken into account as we move forward as well. But this specific amendment was around the funding, the way in which people pay for their curbside refuse collections.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Wilson. Deputy Chair Pipkin.
Kia ora, Chair. I've got caught out eating cake.
There are no other questioners, so you'll have to...
Ready. Kia ora, Sarah. Thank you. And I understand this is very much, we're just bringing it all, updating the plan based on the decisions we've already made, that been consulted on, which is all good. Very happy to support this. But I have two questions, if I may, Chair, just use this opportunity. Can you please clarify what is going to happen in the next steps for the work that's being done for the city centre and the services that are needed to bring the city centre residents in line with the services that the rest of the region receive? And also for our Gulf Islands, is there plans that will update the Haraki Gulf Waste Minimization Plan when the food scrap services are also rolled out to the islands for a bespoke service that's for the islands? And so I guess I'm just using this as an opportunity to really understand how those two bits of work, what progress is being made, the timeline, and what that's going to mean for consequential amendments to the plans.
Through the Chair, thank you for those questions. So I'll take the first one around the city centre. We do have a specific work programme at the moment looking at city centre, both in terms of the existing services for recycling and for refuse. We're doing some intensive work on high density housing and how we work not just for the city centre but also more broadly across the whole region, given directions by central government around intensification and our own unitary plan. So we have to implement the multi-unit development opt-out policy, and also so that's made us look at the way in which we deliver services. We also, the current rollout of the food scraps doesn't include the city centre at the moment, so we're working to try and develop a programme for that. So in order to do that, we are talking with those companies that provide that service already in the city centre, to some multi-unit developments and to some businesses. And we're also talking to the city centre residents group. We're about to engage with them and work out how we can hold some focus groups to make sure that we provide the right services. We've also been to a number of these multi-unit developments. They are all slightly different. They all have different challenges in terms of how we can provide those services. So we're trying to work out the best way and the most efficient way that we can provide services there that will have meet our waste diversion obligations, but also have a really high level of customer satisfaction with those. We've also spoken to other cities such as Sydney around what they've been doing and are taking learnings from there as well. So, but that's all being programmed against the other changes we need to make sure that we do it in a stepwise way that's that our contracted operators can actually deliver. So it's a lot of work. We plan to take that to bring to the local board as well and discuss, because I know they have Waitemata, our local board has a strong interest in this area and has given us some really good feedback and direction previously. So,
thank you. And the second part? Or
and the second part on the Gulf Islands, yes, so specifically around food scraps. So the current Gulf Islands plan doesn't commit to a curbside service for food scraps on the islands, but we held a hui earlier in the year with the on Aotea Great Barrier Island, and what we could do. We funded 2 projects around diversion of organics through the WMIF last year, and we're waiting for the results of those, what that could look like, and that includes things like different mechanisms like a centralised composting system, or potentially green cones, which is on-site composting, what that could look like. So we're just waiting for the results of those to come through. We're working with Anamata, the community recycling centre there, to try and work out what's the best for that local situation. And then another island, but quite a different island, obviously, Waiheke, we're working there. Once again, the commitment there is to support and partner. not to provide a service at the moment in the current plan. There's going over with the local board to meet with the Community Recycling Centre there week after next to look at how we can best support the aspirations around diversion of organic material from landfill in Waiheke as well. Changes that, as a result, we will bring forward within the next waste plan, and that they'll be debated as part of that next waste plan, and then initiatives adopted accordingly, depending on what comes from that.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a very comprehensive response. I'd like to quickly be able to package it up, because that was great, just to be reminded where we're at. Kia ora.
Thank you. There are no more questions, so I will ask you to move away from the table, please, Sarah. Thank you very much. Deputy Chair Pipakun would like to move. Any seconder? No? Oh, Councillor Darby? Oh, the Mayor Goff? The Mayor? Mayor Goff, sorry. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you very much.
No comments on that one, Chair.
Oh, there were no comments. Sorry. We'll move to item 10, thank you. The Auckland Climate Grant Pilot. We have Fran and Lucy.
Tēnā koutou katoa, malo e leile, greetings to you all. Ko Lucy Hookoff tōku ingoa, hei kai whakahere mō Te Ropu Community Climate Action. I'm the Community Climate Action Team Manager, and I'll hand over to Fran to briefly introduce herself.
Ko Fran Haken-Taku ingoa, low carbon specialist.
Oh, you need to hit the...
Sorry, I'm going to call Fran Haken-Taku ingoa, low carbon specialist in the Community Climate Action Team.
Great, and I just wanted to acknowledge Fran. I'm sure you all know her from her advice on grants in the past, but what we'll be presenting today is really her work over the last 9 months. So, yeah, as you probably remember, the Auckland Climate Grant was funded through the Climate Investment Package in the recovery budget. So in year one, we chose to distribute that additional funding through the Regional Environment and Natural Heritage Grant Scheme. And that went well. We were able to distribute over $350,000 to 14 new climate projects. But during that, the last year, we've developed a proposal for a new Auckland Climate Grant. And if you go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. So we will have $400,000 to distribute through the grant in 22-23, and that will increase gradually over future financial years. The purpose of the grant, there are three key purposes. One is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through community-based action, build community resilience to climate change impacts, and support Māori-led responses to climate change. And obviously, given the value of the grant, it's aimed more at those community and household level responses rather than major infrastructure or that kind of initiative. So for the pilot year, emissions reduction is the top priority. We're expecting approximately 70% of grants to be allocated to that. And of course, with a less going to resilience, and of course, Māori-led projects could be either focused on reducing emissions or supporting resilience. And in terms of the priority areas for the grant funding in 22-23, the areas we've identified are Māori-led action, and so that's obviously part of the partnership between Council and mana whenua under Te Tiriti. We also are aware that in the past, from climate and sustainability grants at the regional and local level, less of those have gone to Māori-led projects than we would like, so we're trying to improve that. The other priorities are transport, because it is the highest source of emissions in Auckland, and there's a lot of community enthusiasm and active groups working in that area. Food has also been identified as a priority because it's the second highest source of consumption emissions, so the emissions that people can influence through their day-to-day choices. And there's also a lot of community enthusiasm in that area and among a diverse range of communities in Auckland. And then also energy, the energy we use in our homes and businesses. And we have some great projects running now which are bringing a lot of co-benefits in terms of helping low-income Aucklanders to warm up their homes as well as save emissions. And so we've taken a little bit of a different approach with this grant than some of the other regional grants. We want to split the grant into two categories. There'll be response grants. So these are lower value grants that we want to have a simplified application process for and a quicker turnaround in decision making. And that application process might involve people being able to make a video or even verbal application, and then we'll work with them to support them to fill in the form. And part of what we're trying to do with that is to reach some of those groups that we know have found council grant processes hard to access in the past. So groups such as Youth, Pacifica, Marae and Rangatahi Māori. And obviously we have other initiatives that are underway. For example, our Resilient Marae project and Mā Tātahi Taiao, our Rangatahi Māori project. And so the staff working on those projects will be working quite closely with these underserved groups to help them apply and make it easier for them to put forward successful grant applications. And so for those smaller grants, we will have multiple grant rounds a year, and the decision making would be delegated to the General Manager of Environmental Services. And one of the benefits of that delegation is that we can turn around the decision making much faster. For the strategic grants, that would be the more kind of standard grants process that you see for the REN and the Waste Minimization Innovation Fund, higher value grants that we would be aiming for significant innovation or impact. Those grants could potentially be multi-year funding for up to 3 years, and the decision-making for those grants, we've recommended that it be delegated to the General Manager of Environmental Services in this year. That's largely because of the timing of when the grant will be adopted and the election, and it would be brought to a committee of council in future years. And so the funding round dates for the response grants, like I mentioned, there'll be multiple funding rounds. It will be a shorter application time and a quicker turnaround process. And then for the strategic grants, we'd have one round that will open on the 26th of September and close at the end of October, and we would aim to have the grants awarded by Christmas, which I think one of the big benefits of that approach is that we last distributed climate and sustainability grants to the community in December 2021, so there won't, I guess, be any gap in that support from a community perspective. So that's the outline of the grant, and happy to take any questions before you move to the decision.
Thank you both, and thank you for the work done on this and also responding to our feedback around how we would like it to roll out in this year because of the tight time frame with the election and other things, but also the want for some more democratic oversight for the larger grants in the future. And I know it was not intentional to say lower value. I think you meant lower quantum because they'll all be very valued projects that come through the grant process, Lucy. But thank you both for the work on this. First question, Member Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the great presentation, some really good detail in there. I've got two partai if I can. One is how have Mā Tāwaka perspectives being taken into account in terms of consideration, please?
I think that, sorry, through the chair, that's a good question, Member Wilson. I think our engagement has been largely focused on mana whenua to this point. We did hold some workshops that were open to community stakeholders as well. Did any Mā Tāwaka groups attend those, Fran?
Not from my memory, no.
So I think...
Thank you. So, yeah, it's not reflected in the documentation, so some consideration would be good moving forward. My second question, if I can, I note the grant includes a Māori outcomes assessment criteria. How will these be considered in the recommendation process? And is there criteria that aids that process?
So for that Māori outcomes area, that would be assessed by our Māori specialists who are working in the Community Climate Action team to, I guess, give us advice on how well grants are contributing to that. And then we would take that into account when we make the grant decisions. So, you know, as grants get a score against each of the criteria. Does that clarify your question?
Yes and no. So it'd be good to understand the criteria that's utilised in the process and how the Māori outcomes assessment works, bearing in mind it may be that Mātāwaka hasn't been taken into consideration, which is sometimes the downside of INES, which doesn't contain membership. So I'm going to leave that there, and I'm sure the Secretariat will be happy to support in any way that you require to move forward. Thank you.
Through the Chair, thank you, Member Wilson. It's a really good point about Mātāwaka engagement that we can keep in mind for future grant rounds, and also we have been meeting with the IMSB Secretariat about climate projects, and we definitely will touch base with them on this as well.
Thank you, Member Wilson. Great questions, and I think that this climate grant does need to reflect or work with Mātāwaka, considering the other more substantive funding come from the climate initiatives will likely be going to mana whenua marae, but there could also be the urban marae that are Mātāwaka that come forward for that that other funding, but which will be connected to this. But thank you. There are no more questions. Could I have a mover? Deputy Chair, Coombe, and a seconder?
Happy to second, Mr. Chair.
Cool, that was Councillor Cooper. Thank you. Are there any comments on this one? Anyone online? No, just once again, thank you both and the team, and this is just another exciting part of the Climate Initiatives funding that will be helping out communities across Tāmaki Makaurau to help embed Te Tarakia Tāwhiri across our city. So thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed? Cool, that was all in favour. Thank you. Thanks very much. Right. Right, we're on to the Natural Environment and Water Quality Targeted Rates End of Year Report. I think Rachel is on her own for this one by the looks, but you're more than capable to.
Kia ora koutou, ko Rachel Takuingwa, General Manager of Environmental Services. I'm actually hoping that I've got Nick Viger from Healthy Waters online with me, otherwise it will be me talking to both the Natural Environment Targeted Rate and the Water Quality Targeted Rate. So I'm really pleased to present to you the year-end report for both the Natural Environment Targeted Rate and the Water Quality Targeted Rate for 21-22. This is the fourth year that these targeted rates have been running for. I also just wanted to note that in the agenda report, you'll also see that we've included the annual implementation report for the Regional Pest Management Plan. And the reason for that is much of the Regional Pest Management Plan is implemented through the Natural Environment Targeted Rate. Very shortly, I'm going to take you through a very brief presentation with really a bit of a focus on sort of the key highlights, some of the key highlights that have been achieved over this past year. But just before I do that, I really wanted to start with a thank you to Mayor Goff, to you, Richard, as the Chair, and all committee members for your support and interest in this work over this past year and the preceding years. Just in terms of the natural environment targeted rate, we are delivering that through a number of different programs. This year we did make the decision to actually split out our islands and marine work into 3 separate programs just to really reflect the diversity in that space. So we now have an islands, a marine and pathways and a marine ecology program. So that's just something that's slightly different than the way that we've worked before. We also have a new program that we've stood up, which is called the Biodiversity Focus Area Program. So that's new to the natural environment targeted rate portfolio. And this program aims to protect the full range of ecosystems and species that we have across the region and to help guide the prioritisation and delivery of biodiversity management across both council and private land to achieve those outcomes. So like I said, I'm going to talk to a small number of highlights. There were many more, of course, and those are detailed in the attached report. But here are just a couple. So we completed the first long-term Cody health monitoring survey in the Waitakere Ranges, which you'll all be familiar with. That saw us carrying out a very comprehensive survey that will now give us a very good baseline and a suite of information to help guide management decisions moving forwards. We were able to complete 24,000 hectares of ground-based possum control across the region this past year, and that is significant. It's the largest area we've been able to achieve in one single year ever. So really, I think that's a tremendous result, and you know, of course, we will continue to grow on that. But a real testament to a range of community groups, council teams, regional park staff, contractors working hard to deliver that across the region. One of the resounding successes that we've had this year in terms of sort of seeing real tangible outcomes as a result of our pest control work has been the results from the recent census in the Hanua Ranges, looking at our kokako population there. And we actually do 2 different surveys now. One focuses on our intensively managed area, which has been where we started our kokako program back in the 90s. And we now are able to actually expand that survey beyond that intensively managed area to wider parts of the park. So through both of those different sets of survey, we counted 258 kokako pairs. 229 of those were in the intensively managed area, but notably 29 pairs and a number of single birds were actually outside right across wide parts of the parkland. And really that's the first time we've seen kokako starting to pair up well beyond the boundaries of that intensively managed area. This makes this, the Hanua Ranges now the 2nd largest mainland population for kokako in New Zealand. And given that it has more than 40 founding pairs making up that population, it's really a priority 1 site now for kokako conservation. We have been able to award over 600,000 to 37 successful applicants through our Community Coordination and Facilitation Grant. That grant is one that is focused on really helping community groups through supporting capacity for them to be able to coordinate and facilitate their activities. And it really complements some of our other grants, such as the Regional Environment Natural Heritage Grant, which is more focused around funding the tangible things that are done out on the ground. So this is really to help with the capacity aspect that often community groups find is difficult to get support for through other funding mechanisms. And so that included a portion of funding that actually spanned more than 1 year. So we are looking to support more multi-year projects, recognising that sometimes in the natural environment and water quality areas, you know, one-off funding is not necessarily as helpful as being able to support multi-year funding. The last highlight there that I thought was of note, just to bring to your attention and just recognising that we are really starting to ramp up our work in the marine space, is that we carried out over 1,200 vessel hull inspections. And so we do that to look at in-water fouling, because of course that presents a risk in terms of moving marine pests around not just within the waters of Tamaki Makaurau, but also beyond our region to other parts of New Zealand. And, you know, that certainly has resulted in some instances where we have found significant marine fouling on the hulls of vessels, and we've been able to carry out interventions that have prevented those species moving to other locations. This slide here just covers off just the financial side of the targeted rate for the past year. We had planned to expend $39.8 million over the course of the year. We didn't quite get there. We got to 28.21 million. You can see there actually, if I had a little bit more detail, it's probably not possible to see on that scale, but we were actually tracking ahead of our planned spend as we went into August. Oh, it is there, and that text is below in August. But of course, then we've had some significant COVID disruptions since then, and that did cause some impact to us in terms of our ability to deliver the program to its full extent, particularly through things like supply chain delays, contractor and staff isolation and sickness, but also the inability really to sort of get out and sort of meet with communities face to face, which is really important for some of our work. But the good news there is that we have made steady progress in catching up on that work, and in fact, as we've come into this current financial year, we're now tracking ahead. So some really good gains made, I think, despite some challenges there in that COVID environment. I'm now going to hand to Nick, who I can see on my screen, and Nick, you might just need to give me the nod as to when you want me to move through the slides.
Nick looks like he's coming to us from an outfall.
He's out in the natural environment.
Kia ora, Chair. I'm coming to you from Glen Esk Stream in Piha, actually. If everyone can, I'm hoping everyone can hear me all right. I've got a chainsaw in the background, so I'm hoping that doesn't come through for you. Look, the water quality targeted rate, this first slide is very simply just indicating all the various bits of the program. And so we obviously have the Western Isthmus Water Quality Improvement Program. That was the largest project in the first iteration of the water quality targeted rate and continues to be the biggest spend. And that's what I'll talk about in particular in a second. But just to point out all the other bits of the program that are funded out of the targeted rate. So the Safe Networks program, which works with water care to eliminate wastewater stormwater connections. Also a rural version of that, our Safe Septic program, and other work streams in there are urban and rural stream rehabilitation, an urban contaminant reduction program that works across the region. In this most recent version of the water quality targeted rate, we have the Eastern Isthmus Water Quality Improvement Program. Now, in terms of funding, that sits a little bit behind the Western Isthmus, but it's certainly the next major program. And we're starting to get some, we're just about at the point of getting the first projects coming along and into delivery for that Eastern Isthmus program. The Southern Catchments Alignment program is a program to look at the Manukau Harbour in particular and look at opportunities. There's a lot of development and a lot of upgrades by the riding authorities, AT and NZTA there, and the Southern Catchment Alignment program looks to work with both of those to simply get more treatment where we don't currently have any. So those are broadly the programs. And Rachel, if you could move the slide, thank you. Highlights so far. The Western Isthmus program has had its early major projects, and so the key major projects early on in the piece were the outfall projects, so the Daldy Street outfall and also the St Mary's Bay Tunnel. So they are done and operational. We've also had separation in Freeman's Bay, around Picton Street, which is now complete, except for one water quality device, which is about to get works to put that in shortly. And we've also had separation in Wairaka, and also away from the Western Isthmus. There's also been water quality targeted rate money spent on the Okahu Bay separation, which was completed about 2 years ago. So across all of those early works, 10.7k of major network, with 3k of that put in last year. The Safe Networks program, meanwhile, over the course of a year, inspects something like 7k of public stormwater and wastewater networks, and so that's been ongoing. And in the Safe Septics program, we now have a fully functional SAP-based database for all 45,000 on-site wastewater assets, and a program to ensure that property owners have in fact had those devices inspected on a regular basis. And of course, in the Kaipara huge program, the Kaipara remediation program, installed 198,000 kilometres of fencing and planted nearly 400,000 plants over the course of the year. And those are the major highlights. Rachel, if you could just flip to the next slide, please. And here we see where our budget's tracking against the original spend to ensure there were early works in this program, and the spend profile in the Western Isthmus program in particular was always to go a little earlier and then to have a hiatus around these times. And so broadly at the moment, apologise, I'm struggling on my device to see the numbers on that slide, but probably at the moment I'll just leave you to look at that, to look at those budget spend and forecasts. And do we have another slide, Rachel?
No, that's it. Thanks,
No,
Nick.
that's it.
Thank you.
And maybe I just make one final comment on particularly on the Eastern and the Western Isthmus programs. So the Eastern Isthmus program, first major project for that is the Lower Kaiba separation, which is now in design and is due to go into construction within about a year. That'll be a fairly major project, which removes a lot of stormwater from the wastewater network around Newmarket. And in the Western Isthmus program, we've recently signalled a bit of a change in direction across many catchments, a lesser degree of separation across the program in order to get within our budgetary constraints and achieve the outcomes on the time frame we need to. And so what that will mean for the program is where we had some separation projects that were due to be running over the next 2 or 3 years, there will be a little less spend than forecast, and some of that spend will come in the last 4 years of the program, in particular with some of the major wastewater upgrades. And that's my update. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora, thank you very much. Both of you, phenomenal amount of work again under really difficult conditions again this year, with almost half the financial year lost. Right, we have questions from Councillor Simpson first.
Oh, thank you, Chair. And look, thanks, team. This is an outstanding presentation. So my question is twofold. Knowing that this is a regional fund and regionally put together, are you putting anything out local board area by local board area by way of an end of term report to sell the good news to local communities? That's my first question. I have one more.
And I primed them for your question yesterday, Councillor Simpson. I knew it would come.
Through the Chair. So yes, I'll answer this just quickly in 2 parts, also reflecting on the promotion of this work regionally as well. So we are obviously going to make the highlights report available publicly through our website, but we're also equally working on what we call the snapshots for local boards. So whilst this is a regionally funded work, we have had a really good level of interest from local boards about what activity is happening in their local area, and also have been having a number of conversations around how we can work together in terms of leveraging and sort of, I guess, optimising the local spend and the regional spend to achieve the best environmental outcomes at local place. So those local snapshots are currently being developed. They do take a little bit of manual work to do because of the way we capture information for regional programs isn't always split out at local board level. So we do have to do a little bit of manual manipulation to pull that together, but they're in progress at the moment and should follow very shortly after the release of the regional report. So we're probably just looking at another couple of weeks away to having those out to all local boards, but they are coming.
Thank you very much for that, and please copy in councillors to those reports. Look, my second question, in the interests of always trying to sell good news, which seems to be pretty hard in our organisation, what are you doing to promote this outstanding work to the wider network? And I say that to you, Chair, to you, Mayor, and to staff, because this is outstanding. I mean, this is lovely work. I think there's no one that won't love what this is doing. Look, no targeted rate is ever hugely liked. It's always extra money, especially when it's based on capital value. So to see just to see it promoted in a positive way to Aucklanders, I think is really important, and I want to know what you're doing about that. What I'm saying is Auckland, our Auckland isn't going to cut it, in my opinion. This needs to go bigger than that. Thanks.
Through the chair, I think really appreciate that challenge and that question. I think we work very hard to try and get as much media cut through as we can for the programs that we're delivering. So, agree that our Auckland isn't the one channel that we need to use for this, and we have got some fantastic stories to tell. We've been really fortunate actually over this past year. We have great support from our comms and marketing team who work really proactively with us to get the stories out. We've had international coverage through The Guardian and other outlets promoting, I guess, the work we've been doing in our Cody space. So that's had particularly good uptake. We've had a whole raft of different media that have picked that up. Through from the survey work to the dog stuff, to the work that we're doing with Te Koro Maki in partnership, respecting both the cultural and the ecological elements that we're trying to bring together. And we do look for as many opportunities as we can to sort of tell the stories about the work we're doing. One of the things that I'm quite conscious of too in doing that is making sure that we're bringing attribution of the targeted rate into the messages that we're putting out, because I think it's important that people understand that this work is being funded through the targeted rate. So we've certainly got that front and centre of mind. Nick, I'm not sure if you want to add anything in terms of sort of the specific work that you're doing to promote the water quality work.
No, look, I haven't got anything specifically to add to that. I think we're always looking to get that story out there. For us, a lot of the work around the Western and the Eastern and safe networks and safe septics is very tied in with Safe Swim and all the inevitable media coverage that we get through there. I think in terms of the Western Isthmus program in particular, as you're all aware, it's going through a little bit of a change of direction, and I think as we have those clear projects coming out and clear timings, we'll be looking to make sure people understand, how all that fits together and how it all ends up resolving a significant water quality problem. Got it.
Okay, look, that's, you've got my challenge. Thank you. And to the Mayor and Deputy, I just hope some of this is in your final end of term wrap up. Thank you. I won't need to speak later, Richard, but it's great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Member Wilson, next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nick and Rachel. Really, really interesting presentation. Nick, I'm really looking at the slide that talked about the southern catchment alignment, and I thought I heard you say that the Manukau harbour was potentially a target. So I'm very interested in actually what does that mean, and how does one, if it is going through Wakakotahi or AT, how does one actually get a viewing of that to see if it would, there's an equity thing, I guess, from my perspective in terms of south, and that would be hugely appreciated in terms of if that's where the targeted rate will be, then that should be promoted.
Kia ora, through the chair. I think the southern catchments piece of work is probably the least progressed of any of our pieces of work. We're very conscious of the fact that we need to spread and deliver water quality benefits around the region. The southern catchments alignment was a recognition of the fact that we know we have poor water quality, in particular with an urban contaminant. Sorry, I should start. The Manukau Harbour has many issues. Some of them nutrient based, some of them rural, but in particular, we are very conscious of large areas of development, increased urbanisation, and the need to start pulling back on the contaminants that are going in and utilising those programs to get some clawback. And so what we're trying to do is to work with all of those providers I mentioned to understand through their developments, which where we get an opportunity to retrofit urban contaminant management in there. As a program, it's really in the planning phase at this time. I think probably in around sort of 12 months or so, we will have a good enough conception of our various other programs that we're looking to work with to elaborate a bit more of a view on the detail of that program and what it will look like. Kia ora.
Thank you. It is imperative, my view of the world, in terms of equity, in terms of being out south, in terms of it being the Manukau, that it should form some priority. I'm not pushing that, but it just seems a little bit unusual to just call it an alignment as opposed to how the Western Isthmus and the like are being referred to. Thank you.
I'll take that on board. Kia ora.
Thank you, Member Wilson. Really good points. And I think, Nick, if we could get some information to Member Wilson and IMSB too about the number of projects for the Manukau that it covers, but also why it's slightly different, because we don't have the separation issues. It's quite a different, it's not so much an infrastructure issue as it is in the centre of the city where we don't have that separated wastewater, stormwater infrastructure.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. I can put some appropriate level information together and get that back to all councillors if that helps.
Thank you. Mayor Goff.
Yeah, thank you very much to Rachel and Nick for these reports, and obviously we've all got a vested interest in the outcome of it because we bit the bullet and we put the targeted rates in place. But I want to build on Councillor Simpson's comments a little bit, because I think we need to package the outcomes a little differently and a little better so that we know what the outcomes, the actual outcomes we're seeking are and what that means. So let me give you an example. It's great that we're now got a 24,000 hectare area of possum control, but I'd really like to know how many possums, rats and stoats approximately, you know, within the closest 10,000 or even 100,000 we've wiped out. You know, I know that when we dropped 1080 3 years ago, we practically eliminated possums, rats and stoats from the Hunuas, and we're about to do it again. I'm part of the Wairoa pest control area, and you know, I can tick off 14 opossums at the bottom of my garden in a Tim's trap, which is part of that program. But it'd be, if I just use this as an example, if we were able to say, because of pest control, we have eliminated X 100,000 or million rats, an estimated X number of rats, possums and stoats, and the outcome of this is we have stopped, there's estimates on how much bush possums chew through each night, and there's estimates on what it does to bird life, and we have got something specific about the kokako. But I think we need to repackage it so that it's much more digestible by the public. And, Nick, on the, I saw in my mouth sort of dropped open a little bit, the Kaipara Moana remediation, 198,000 kilometres of fencing. That's a power of fencing. But to the average punter, well, what does that mean? Why are we doing it? And we need to do the background of what's happened to the Kaipara and why this is critical. So I just think in terms of packaging and by way of an announcement, this announcement, you really have to work to find out what the outcomes are. And I'm wondering, I mean, do you have any estimate, for example, of the number of pests that we've eliminated? Because that's a headline by itself. But I don't know whether it's, 200,000 or 3 million or whatever. But I'd just like to see this built up so that people can readily understand what the impact is. So, my questions are, can you convert those into outcomes? One other example, so we've tested 86 stormwater outlets, but how many contaminations have we found where, septic tanks or sewerage are leaking directly into the stormwater and we've been able to remedy? Do we have access to that sort of data to bring this to life a little bit more dramatically?
Through the chair.
Mr. Mayor, through the chair. I think we most certainly do have that data in terms of the Safe Networks program that you mentioned, and we do try and sort of daylight those figures. Councillor Simpson will know from her area, because we're doing a lot of work in Hobson Bay. We keep a sort of a running tally of that, exactly the sort of thing you mentioned. I think probably you're right, we can do a better job in expanding that same way of dealing with it out a little bit broader.
Yeah, I think just to jump in there, sorry, Rachel, but I think it would be good, Nick, if we could, I know it will come out in the local board separation like it usually does. Like from memory, the Castor Bay Milford was 651 properties, and then you found 35 issues from those 651, and same with Takapuna, I think it was 400 properties, and you found 40, and then those 40 were rectified. And in the Waido estuary, we removed the long-term no swim warning for the first time since North Shore City Days. So those, I guess, are the outcomes rather than we surveyed the properties. If there was some for future programs that said we've surveyed 42,000 properties but actually rectified 800 issues across the city, which is the bigger important bit, I think, maybe.
Together with a dramatic picture of sewage pouring into a stream or something like that, so you can bring it to life. I mean, this is what it's really about. This is why we're doing it. And I just feel this is a kind of a sanitised version rather than giving the context and saying, this is what we've achieved with you, you're the ratepayer's dollar, we've done that. So, sorry, Rachel, you were going to talk to it too.
Oh, yes, thank you. Through the chair, so challenge accepted. I think we are in a place now, we're in a better position to be able to start talking to some of those outcomes and the what we're doing and how it, what that really means. A lot of the work has been sort of standing programs up, but we are able to do that now, I think. So take that on board. I can tell you that we have trapped over 3,700 pest animals on islands over the past year. Where we trap them, it's 3,700. Just on islands. Where we trap them, it's easy to count. Where we use other methods, it's a little bit more difficult, but that's where we start to get into estimation. But I take the point, and I think, yes, there is more we can do. One of the things that we've been working on, and I didn't touch on it in the highlights section, is we have over the past year and slightly earlier than that been working on the development of a council-wide conservation management data system, which actually helps us bring together all of the information that we hold relating to sort of the natural environment conservation work that we're doing in a more comprehensive way. It's one of the most well-designed, I think, systems like this in the country, and it's been recognised for that functionality. But that's going to help us with some of that bringing together the story as well. But take that point, and I think we certainly can be doing more of this.
Yeah, just last points, Mr. Chair, if I may. Yeah, I saw the figure of 3,700 for the islands. We're largely talking about Waiheke, are we here? Because most of the islands are already pest-free. So it'd be Waiheke, maybe Barrier, I'm not sure.
We do work across a range of islands, so Barrier would be the significant island. Of course, we've got work or programs happening on Kawau, not so much trapping, but we're gearing up. We're currently doing a feasibility study to look at eradication of mammalian pests on Kawau.
Yeah.
But yes, Waiheke, Aotea.
Yeah, I know you can't give us exact numbers, but if it's 3,700 in the islands, the multiple of that across the Waitakares, the Hunuas, what's going to happen in the next week with the latest 1080 drop, we must have some sort of estimate, and that sort of estimate would be helpful. And the final point I'd make, backing up Councillor Simpson, that information would be most useful if we could have it within a week. Thank you.
We will look at that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And some of the information is in there, but I think it's that next step. Like I think the abatements are recorded, but we don't know if they had a outcome or success or rectified. Maybe that's a bit more long term. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Camera. Thanks, Rachel and Nicholas, or Nick. I mean, this work's really outstanding. And we know that the last LTP we extended the water quality targeted rate out. Rachel, I guess my biggest concern is that the current budget for NETA finishes what, 2024?
Through the chair, we had a 3-year extension added to the targeted rate, so it runs slightly longer than that.
So it was the water. I thought it was the water quality, but was it? I didn't think it was both. That was extended.
Kia ora, Councillor Cooper. We extended both by 3 years, but it was the water quality we increased by the same number.
Sorry, increase, right.
Yeah. So we haven't done that to the NETA.
In terms of that, so that's really my question is, what are the plan? We've got an LTP coming up. It'll come up on us really quickly. And I guess for me is, could we continue this work without the targeted rates, and will we need an increase if we do extend it to actually really crack onto this? Because we had a 30-year water quality plan and to deliver in 10 years. Has anything changed since then that would make us need to re-look at that in the water space, but also in the NETA space? But particularly, we don't have a huge budget for regional parks.
Through the chair, if I might start with that, Nick, and then pass to you. Certainly, in terms of things that have changed for us in the natural environment area. Obviously, we don't have an inflationary adjustment to the natural environment targeted rate, and we are seeing costs go up, which won't be a surprise to anybody. So sort of at some point that's going to have an impact on our ability to deliver to the same scale that we have been. One of the things that we are seeing in our area of work is increasing interest and appetite for landscape scale eradication programs, whether that be on Motu or whether that be on mainland. And those come at some cost. There's opportunities to partner for some of that work, but those types of really large landscape scale programs are likely to need increased investment if we get to a point where we can see that there's a technically feasible pathway to deliver those. So those would be some of the changes. The marine space is an evolving one for us. We also have some potential for I guess, expanded expectation through some of the national work happening in the biodiversity area. We're not quite sure how that's ultimately going to land, but those would be things that we're certainly looking at, as well as doing a current, we're starting a process of just looking at how we're tracking as we head into the 5th year of the targeted rate against the deliverables that we've said that we're going to achieve by the end of the 10-year program, and would certainly be happy to come back and report on that to you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to ask, sorry, Mr. Chair, around the comment around equity before, because I know that we didn't, I just want to understand, I thought that we had created the projects not so much for equity, but for outcomes, and where were the quickest wins we could get, where was the most harm being caused. Is that right? Rather than we've got to do a bit here, bit here, bit there. It was more around what was really important at the moment to either stop or start in terms of stop degradation or whatever, pests. You probably both got a bit of a comment on that one. And I'm sorry, I didn't let you finish, Nick, around the budget.
Through the chair, Councillor, I think first of all, the programs I think are very definitely targeted around what we see as our most significant water quality issues in the first instance. So the combined sewer overflows, I think from a public health perspective, have taken the lead. I would like to think that as the Western Isthmus and then subsequently the Eastern Isthmus start resolving those programs, that they no longer become our region's #1 goal, and we're looking to spend what money we have on other issues, because we know there are plenty out there. I think from a water quality perspective, we do have to wait on the NPS FM and the process that falls out of that. And so I think a lot of the detail around exactly what we'll be doing and where we'll improve as we go through that process. And so, but broadly, we have harbours in particular with water quality issues right around the region. And so the comment about equity was really to sort of look at the fact that we have pressing water quality issues everywhere, and we need to be making some sort of impact for our harbours. I think, in particular, from a water quality perspective, the Manukau has some significant issues compared with some of our other harbours, and so the work we're looking to there will develop with time in terms of sort of resolution around projects. But certainly, I think with time, I think the water quality targeted rate, I'm not sure how to answer in terms of whether it's required or not going forward, and that's from the perspective of through water reform. I'm not. I think we have to understand what falls out of that to understand whether the sort of future increased investment in water quality is coming through a targeted rate kind of vehicle, or whether it's coming through some other vehicle through the water services entity.
Thank you. And I won't speak later, Mr. Chair, but the work's brilliant. And I know even with the work in the kind of southern part of Waitakere, which is the northern part of the Manukau, that's already made a difference in that part of the Manukau, the work you've done. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. That is all my questions. So, comments, right? I'll get would you like to move, Deputy Mayor?
Yes.
And second, the Mayor. Yep. Mayor Goff. Right, we'll go to comments. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks very much, Nick and Rachel. And I remember the day you started, Rachel, your first meeting, and we were at the same time we were starting the 1080 program in the Hunoas, and we had a couple of gay cocoa which weren't breeding that well, so we had to. Yeah, they were gay. Yeah.
There's only one breeding. It works sometimes.
So the work has been outstanding, and it's not only the work but the way you and your team have gone about it. So from my community and from the whole environment around the Hunoas and the rest of Auckland, thank you, because you have created mana around Auckland Council, you have created great environmental outcomes, and I am as proud as bits of the work that you've done. It's been an absolute success. Even the most ardent naysayer against 1080 has basically changed their view. So well done, thank you.
Kia ora, Deputy Mayor. Mayor Goff, did you want to comment on the...
Well, really, I think to reiterate Bill's point about the fantastic work our people have done in this area, when we were thinking about introducing this, what it arose from was a meeting that I had with the environmental staff. Rachel, you were probably there, and there were all these things that we needed to do and no money to do any of it. And I kind of thought about a lot of excuses as to why we couldn't implement the program, and I thought the program was too important not to implement, and hence the environmental targeted rate, which most councillors supported, and all councillors would like to claim credit for the outcomes of now, because the outcomes are spectacular. But I think the critical thing we have to do is to make sure that we inform our rate-paying public of how their money has been spent and what we're achieving through it. On the water quality targeted rate, Nick, my view is if we no longer have control over healthy waters, and it's for an entity that's much wider than Auckland, the water quality targeted rate will go after 2024-25, and the new water services entity will have to add that to their own water rate, because we will not be setting rates and collecting rates for an entity that is not within our control. So hopefully that the work won't be lost, because the new entity will raise that rate directly, but it won't be through council. Thank you.
Are there any other comments? No, I'd just like to acknowledge the team's vast numbers of people who work on these two targeted rate programs. It's been phenomenal. It has been, as Rachel said earlier, ramping up, and we're starting to see the results of that. 4 years, 5 years in place now. It's pretty significant. I think it probably will be something of the Mayor's legacy as well, of actually funding all the things that we need to do. It is not easy to fund, to rate, to ask people for more, and there are complaints about the targeted rates, Mayor Goff, but there doesn't seem to be much acknowledgement for those people complaining about them, that we wouldn't be fixing these long-term massive issues of restoring the modi of our environment across Tamaki Makaurau. The water quality just in the North Shore ward, to have that, and Nick and others have come along to some pretty fierce public meetings on the water quality, especially in the Wairau estuary, and to have that permanent no swim warning removed after nearly 20 years of it being in place, to have significant changes across our city in improving the water quality there, to have those, and on my social media was one of the most popular posts, the kokako, and as Deputy Mayor did joke, there were only a few pairs of males down there at the beginning, and now to see those massive numbers and them to be spreading across to other parts of the city, where we might have, what's happening in Wellington with the kaka, that they're just in people's neighbourhoods now, and people seeing these kids being born today are going to be able to see some of our wildlife that almost disappeared will be quite normal to them in their backyards and in the environment, which is a pretty phenomenal feat, because of the work that these targeted rates do, is changing the mistakes. We're not going to fix all the issues, but I think it is a phenomenal change that we're seeing in such a short time from the funding and the work and the program. So acknowledge all that, and we do have to continue to sell how good these things are to the public, as Councillor Simpson and others would attest to. So when we get those things sent out to us, it'd be great if everyone's talking about the changes in their wards and local board areas and the wider city, because the environment doesn't see those boundaries of a local board. It's actually our responsibility for the whole city. So, kia ora, thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
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 Cool. Anyone opposed? Good, thank you very much. That was passed unanimously. Or you don't have to write that, but carried. Right, on to item 12. This is our second to last. We should get through this before lunch. Does anyone need a break? We should move straight to this. Yeah. Right, move to item 12, the annual update on delivery of Te Tarakia Tawhiri, Auckland's climate plan. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Matthew Blakey taku ingoa. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Auckland Council, and I lead the team responsible for Te Tarakia Tawhiri, Auckland's climate plan. I'm joined today by Petra Pearce, our lead climate resilience advisor in the Chief Sustainability Office. The item today is to present to you an overview of the Progress Report 2022 for Te Tarakia Tawhiri, Auckland's climate plan. I will start with this roadmap of climate action, roadmap of Auckland Council's climate action response. And you can see it goes back to 2015 in terms of our membership, our joining C40 cities and our climate leadership through C40 cities. I won't go back to 2015. I will start with last year in terms of 2021. This is an update on the last year. So as you all know, a $152 million climate action package was approved as part of the 10-year budget, 2021 to 2031. Since then, there has been some significant progress, or significant updates, I should say, at both a global level, a national level, and at a regional level. So in terms of updates over the last year, there has been at a global level 2 very significant IPCC reports published, one relating to climate impacts, adaptation and vulnerability, and a second one relating to the mitigation of climate change. Both very clear in their messaging that urgent action is required and that time is running out for that urgent action to take place. There's also been significant updates at a national level in terms of the publication of the government's first emissions reduction plan and the first national adaptation plan, both of which are important for Auckland to consider and certainly have an influence on our climate action performance and the ability for us to respond to climate change. You will all be familiar with the climate action targeted rate that was adopted earlier this year. So $574 million of revenue raised through the climate action targeted rate, which will unlock additional funding through central government co-funding and additional fair revenue, taking that total investment to over $1 billion. Of course, a few weeks ago, the Transport Emissions Reduction Pathway was adopted by this committee, and that was a significant step forwards in terms of our approach and the clarity around the need to respond to climate action through transport interventions and through transforming the transport system. I will come on to that later. The progress report itself, you will have seen this diagram before from the last update. The progress report itself is focused on evaluating progress, summarising our successes and challenges, and outlining future focus. In terms of the reporting, the last progress report was presented to you in December of last year. We're now coming back to you in September of this year, so 9 months later, not a full year later, to present the progress report to you. Reporting will be in or around September, depending on the committee dates, from this date forward to align with other reports, other key reports, and to ensure we can provide combined advice. One thing to note is that staff from across Auckland Council and CCOs have provided input for the progress report, which was attached to the committee papers. This is a progress report with content from across Council and CCOs, not just from the Chief Sustainability Office, recognising that this work is work for all of Council and all of CCOs. It's not just the role of the Chief Sustainability Office, although we do manage the delivery of it and are responsible for it. The next slide identifies the governance structure for Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, and you will have seen this diagram before. So if I quickly talk through this from the bottom up, you will see the priorities outlined there in terms of natural environment, built environment. There are then a number of action owners and partnerships that need to be in place to ensure that this is delivered effectively. And those action owners and partnerships are both internal to Council and CCOs and external. It is worth noting and reminding, an important reminder that Te Tarakia Tāwhiri is a regional plan. It requires action and commitment from a range of regional stakeholders. It's not just Auckland Council's plan. One way in which we've looked to progress the delivery of the actions that Auckland Council has either control or influence over is through establishing a priority leadership program internally, where priority leads are responsible for accelerating progress in terms of the delivery of actions in Te Tarakia Tāwhiri. The Chief Sustainability Office is the lead for Te Tarakia Tāwhiri. On the right-hand side, you see some of the region-wide elements. So the Rangatahi Ropu, which is in the process of being established. Advisory panels, we have a cross-panel climate change working group that meets every 3 months or when needed, made up of members of the demographic advisory panels, and an independent advisory group that was established during the development of Te Tarakia Tāwhiri. A leadership group is in the process of being established. This is a regional leadership group to accelerate the implementation of actions and very much focused on cross-sectoral partnerships. And then on the left-hand side there, you'll see the Auckland Council focus. So we have a political reference group that has been set up and meets every 3 months, and of course the Environment and Climate Change Committee, whose remit includes Te Tarakia Tāwhiri. In terms of the monitoring and reporting framework, I'll work from top to bottom here. We have the targets that are set in Te Tarakia Tāwhiri in terms of the 50% reduction in emissions by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. These targets are aligned with Auckland delivering on its fair share contribution of the objectives of the Paris Commitment, or in other words, our fair share contribution towards limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. This is about us delivering our fair share. Climate adaptation targets are in development and extensive work is underway relating to those. The priorities at the top, the 8 priorities, are identified. There's a number of action areas under that. So there's 5 action areas for natural environment, for example, with 25 actions sitting underneath that. And that works across, as you can see. The progress indicators, there are the headline indicators, which are the red circles there. You can see there's 2 for natural environment, and then every 3 years we'll be doing a deep dive looking at all of the indicators. So you can see there's 8 for natural environment and looking at the more detailed indicators across the plan. The cross-cutting indicators are emissions by sector, net emissions and gross emissions. You will see in the progress report that we don't yet have indicators for Te Pua Waitanga or Te Tātai. This is a priority focused on Te Ao Māori principles. It outlines 7 Te Ao Māori principles that need to be interwoven throughout the other priorities and actions in a meaningful way to ensure that those principles inform the design and development of climate action going forwards. Work is underway, and I feel progress has been made in the last 9 months, but we still have a way to go on that. And I want to acknowledge that because I know that was a point that was made at the last progress update, that we do need indicators for Te Pua Waitanga or Te Tātai to ensure that accountability is in place. In terms of the action areas, so this is the evaluation of the actions within the plan. What you see on the left-hand side there is the breakdown by priority in terms of actions that are in blue, complete, green, on track, dark blue, partially underway but require more work, and red, not started. The top bar represents the overall proportion of actions. So you can see there that 33% are on track, 51% are partially underway but require more work, and 15%, are not started, with 1% complete. When we compare that to the progress report that was presented in December last year, 33% were on track, so the same number, 39% were partially underway but requiring more work, and 28% were not started. So that's the chart at the bottom of the screen there. So in summary, from 2021 to 2022, there has been an increase in the number of actions that are either on track or underway. So an increase from 72% to 84%, and a decrease in the number of actions that are not started. So a reduction from 28% to 15%. So progress has been made in terms of actions that are underway, but it is important to stress that significant additional action and commitment is required by a range of stakeholders across the region, not just Auckland Council, not just CCOs, but we need to work in partnership with regional stakeholders to ensure that actions are increasing in terms of their delivery and both the speed and scale of that delivery. The progress indicators in Te Tarakia Tāwhiri are outlined here. You can see the progress indicators identified, the data for those. We haven't established or confirmed trends relating to these indicators. We have 2 years worth of data and it's too early to establish a trend. But what I have identified here, what the team has identified, is an indication of whether the indicators changed from last year or from 9 months ago. And you can see that identified by the green, amber, red and grey in terms of that change. And just to note that some of those have been impacted by lockdown, as you might expect, and obviously the circumstances of the last year. But there are certainly some positive messages in there in terms of, if you look certainly at the work that Auckland Council has done to engage with communities, significantly more Aucklanders have been engaged in living a low carbon lifestyle, and certainly we've exceeded our target relating to Auckland schools engaged in sustainability education. That's an increase from last year. There was a decrease in the number of litres of diesel, a decrease in the number of litres of petrol purchased annually, but a slight increase in the number of litres of diesel purchased. So you would expect that in terms of petrol because of the lockdown that we experienced towards the end of last year. Petrol consumption was down 11% last year compared to previously. Apologies for the delay. We seem to have a low battery on the controller. So in terms of the cross-cutting indicators in the plan, it is worth noting here that one of the cross-cutting indicators is the regional greenhouse gas inventory. The greenhouse gas inventory in the progress report is the same greenhouse gas inventory that was presented 9 months ago. It is the inventory to 2018. Therefore, we can't comment on a change since the last progress report because we're using the same inventory. The 2019 inventory will be published shortly later this year. We do know that the same message as last year, that gross emissions increased by 2.5% between 2016 and 2018, which is clearly not the trend that we're looking to continue, but that is a historic trend in those 2 years. So we do need to see those emissions sharply declining to meet our targets for both 2030 in particular and 2050. Climate adaptation targets are in progress and we will be coming back next term with an update on that. I've spoken about the progress indicators and the status of the actions relating to Te Tarakia Tāwhiri. I think it's important also to highlight that there has been important progress for climate action and climate action leadership over the last 9 months, including the development and approval of the climate action targeted rate, a significant step forward in terms of raising additional investment for transforming our public transport system, investing in low carbon transport, improving the access to public transport for many more Aucklanders, and delivering increased walking and cycling infrastructure, decarbonising our ferry fleet and growing our urban ngāhere. You are all familiar with this due to the hours of workshops we had discussing this. But it's important to note this as part of the progress that has occurred in the last 9 months. Equally, the transport emissions reduction pathway, a response to Te Tarakia Tāwhiri in terms of outlining clearly the transformational change that's required to deliver on that 64% reduction in transport emissions by 2030. We now have that very clearly in place. The challenge now is to implement that and consider that across all our transport planning investments, such as the ATAP, the RLTP, and also our land use planning, such as the Future Development Strategy. So my last slide here, in conclusion, what's next? At a very high level, there's a lot that needs to occur. Significant additional action and commitment is required by a range of stakeholders across the region, and we need to be leading a lot of that change, working in partnership and collaborating with other stakeholders to ensure that the change occurs in a rapid and impactful way. So facilitating the accelerated delivery of Te Tarakia Tāwhiri is a key focus for the next year, and in particular a key focus for my team, the Chief Sustainability Office. We now have additional staff on board with the expertise to deliver on this. We have both additional capacity and capability to really accelerate the response and deliver further on the climate action response for Auckland. So I'm very much looking forward to that. We need to very much focus on the delivery in partnership with mana whenua as a priority. Te Tarakia Tāwhiri was developed in partnership with mana whenua. As was indicated earlier in the Shoreline Adaptation Plans item, there is a challenge in terms of how we translate that governance arrangement in terms of partnership to an implementation and operational level. How do we ensure that the delivery of Te Tarakia Tāwhiri is done in partnership with mana whenua to uphold the partnership approach that was outlined in Te Tarakia Tāwhiri? And we're working towards that, and we have a hui the week after next to discuss that with mana whenua. We need to focus in on the delivery of the LTP climate package to ensure that it's delivered on time and that we're maximising the impact of the funding that's available. We need to deliver the climate action targeted rate in the most efficient and impactful way, with the focus this year being ensuring that the governance structures and the plans for programme delivery are in place. The transport emissions reduction plan needs to be implemented in a meaningful way, and I've touched on the need for that to inform and shape transport planning and investment going forwards. That absolutely needs to be a priority if we're going to meet our 2030 target. Climate Connect Aotearoa, which many of you may know as the Climate Innovation Hub, funded through the LTP Climate Action Package, is set to launch later this year. And will develop both a virtual and physical hub for partnerships and for climate innovation to really look at what the opportunity is for the region to lead on that. And my last comment there, fundamentally, we really need to focus in on the need to embed climate action across all our planning, investment and decision making. We're only going to arrive at where we need to be if it is central to every decision we make, and it's central to every planning decision and every investment decision. It's not an add-on. It needs to be very much central to everything we do. I will finish there. Very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And sorry, Petra, I didn't introduce you if you had anything to add. No. Thank you. We have our first question from Member Wilson.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Thank you. A lot of work being done in that period of time, and I appreciate that very much, Matt. But I think 9 months ago, I asked the same questions that I want to ask today, and you've already touched on them briefly, saying that it is difficult and there's a hui to be had around partnerships. So that was brought up last hui, 9 months ago, and also the ability to look at the priorities, specifically Te Pua Waitanga o Te Tata, and it hasn't any measurement beside it. That also is a bit of a worry. So I'm wondering why, with all the great progress that's been done throughout the other priorities and measurements attached to them and indicators that exist, there is none, or there isn't any ability to get any around the priority that's been acknowledged and partnerships. Why is that the case, do you think?
Through the chair, thank you, Member Wilson. So firstly, to acknowledge your question, I'm very aware of this. It is a priority, and it has been something we have been working on and in discussion with a number of staff working on Māori outcomes, certainly over the past 9 months. So the answer to your question, why are there not indicators and measurement in place for Te Pua Waitangi or Te Tātai? The first thing to note is that indicators to measure progress were in place from the start for the other priorities. They weren't in place for Te Pua Waitangi or Te Tātai. So the indicators we're measuring against for the other priorities were in place. The task we have now is looking to understand how you measure progress against the Te Ao Māori principles in Te Pua Waitangi or Te Tātai in a meaningful way. We've had a number of discussions with Māori outcomes staff to understand how we do this. Not all advice is aligned. We've had certainly very useful and valuable conversations, and certainly have appreciated the time and the knowledge that the IMSB member staff have IMSB staff have provided us over that time as well, so I'd like to acknowledge that. We are working towards understanding how we do that. Now, do we do that looking at those Te Ao Māori principles? Do we do that on a sliding scale, recognizing that you can't necessarily measure that from a numerical point of view? It's not like measuring litres of petrol consumed, for example. What we've attempted to do in this report is outline key projects that demonstrate or foster those principles to highlight where projects are doing that well. This is very much something, and I acknowledge that we need to be better at this. I've certainly gained a lot of knowledge over the previous 9 months, as well as other members of the team, but we need to be much better at this, and we need to understand how we do this better, and we can only do that through working with staff with Matauranga Māori, staff who understand Te Ao Māori and mana whenua. There is a hesitancy amongst staff to look to measure progress against Te Pua Waitangi or Te Tātai without feeling that they have the credentials, the knowledge to do so. So it's a difficult space. I'm not saying it's not straightforward, but we are committed to improve on that. And I acknowledge that you asked me in December last year how we were going to do this, and that this needed to be in place for accountability. At that point, I wanted to come back today with that fully shaped up so that I could present that back to you and others, but we're not there yet. But I feel we have made progress in terms of our understanding.
Thank you. Just a supplementary, if I can, Mr. Chair. There's no progress shown. Let's call it what it is from 9 months. Hence, the partnership kōrero, on the slide there, I was looking most intently for mana whenua, and I did see a title there, but it was an internally focused staff training, which also meant that there was no partnership role for mana whenua. Can you give me some detail around what it's intended to convey in that slide? I think it was slide 4 on your presentation.
Through the chair, so slide 4 relates to the partnerships and governance update. So this is the partnerships and governance structure that was approved by the Environment and Climate Change Committee a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, after the approval of Te Tarakia Tāwhiri. So there isn't an explicit mention of or identification of mana whenua in this diagram. The assumption here, and I believe the need, is for mana whenua to be working with Auckland Council in partnership in the way that the partnership was intended. So bringing together a Te Ao Māori view of climate change and a Western science view of climate change, so that is our approach. Mana whenua are not identified as a separate box on here because the action owners and partnerships is where mana whenua would sit. They're integral to the development and delivery of Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, and I recognise that that was certainly the case in the development, but that partnership has not translated into delivery in the way that it could have done, and that needs to be addressed. The leadership group mentions mana whenua explicitly as potential members of that regional leadership group, along with other leaders from sectors of the economy and society. So that may be the mana whenua reference you're referring to on that slide.
Thank you. I think I have more comments than I do any more questions, Mr. Chair. Shall I leave that there for the time being?
Yeah, thank you, Member Wilson. Yes, we'll have you down for comment as well. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a few questions here. So if we're looking at the actual attachment here, I've just got a couple of questions on this. On the bottom paragraph of page 12, when we're talking about special character provisions, could I ask you to expand on that opinion in the report on the impact of emissions reduction?
Through the chair, so you're referring to the section on the MPSUD in the report. So you'll notice that the wording in there is closely aligned with the climate impact statement from the committee paper that was presented on the MPSUD. You asked for my opinion on that in terms of special character and the impact on emissions, is that correct? So my opinion on that is that clearly we are in the process of looking to understand how intensification can occur across Auckland, and special character areas are a key part of that discussion and have been a key part of that discussion. It's clear that if we apply special character to large areas of the city that are within walkable catchments of the city centre and train stations and transport stops, we will be losing the opportunity to intensify in areas that deliver the most benefit from an emissions reduction perspective in terms of access to amenities, access to employment, access to transport. So my view is that it's clearly a complex discussion and there's many elements to it, but it is important to note that special character applied in certain locations will reduce the opportunity for a quality compact urban form that can support a reduction in transport emissions.
Thank you. Moving to 20, sorry to make a jump around the attachment here, but page 24, the third paragraph here, which starts the transport emissions reduction pathway. I see an alarming stat here at the bottom, which says, without intervention, Auckland is expected to continue expanding and the average motorised vehicle trip length is expected to increase by around 5% by 2030. Could I get you to kind of explain that a little bit more, because I'm a little bit confused about that?
Through the chair. So that material has been taken from the Transport Emissions Reduction Pathway document. So the statement itself is based on work that has been done, analysis to understand if Auckland's urban form continues to grow spatially, it will result in an increase in vehicle kilometres travelled over that time period.
And sorry, is that foreseen growth or is that extra growth in addition to planned? Because we're already growing out to places like Red Hills, Drury, places like that.
So I'm just looking for that section in the report to make sure that I'm in line with what is stated, but...
Yeah, sorry, I've got, it's page 24, third paragraph in that attachment A.
Oh yes, thank you. Thank you for confirming. So yes, the wording is... I'm just going to make sure the wording is correct. So,
sorry to put you on the spot.
So it does. I just wanted to make sure that I'm correct in my assumption here. Without intervention. So, without intervention, the point being made that based on the current planned growth and trajectory, that will be the situation in terms of vehicle trip length expected to increase by 5% by 2030. So that's without intervention to change the current development pattern that is expected.
Thank you. Thanks. That's very helpful. Just one last question, if I may, Chair. I was hoping in the report, in the local board section, for a bit of an update. But is your team working with the local boards that are producing the climate action plans? And is there anything we can do to help in that area?
Through the Chair. So yes, my team is working with the local boards developing the climate action plans at a local board level. Both my team and the Environment, Education and Community Climate Action team, so Lucy Hawcroft's team, very much looking at how we can provide guidance and advice and also ensure that there's a link between regional direction strategy and local implementation. But importantly, one of the key areas for focus is what are the levers that local boards have to implement meaningful climate action?
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks for that, Matthew. In the report, you've said that the latest stats we have to rely on 1919, but since you published the report, of course, we've had the Stats New Zealand figures. And the good news is that our emissions between 2019 and 2021 dropped by 11% and in every category. And the not so good news is that that's largely due to the COVID restrictions. Have you been able to draw anything further out of those statistics, removing the impact of COVID, if that is possible, to see if there is an underlying improvement in the trend, or is it just too early to tell on that?
Through the Chair. Thank you for the question. So the Stats NZ data that was published for 2021 looked at the different regions across New Zealand and attributed emissions to those different regions. So my initial look at that and feedback I've received, so Auckland household emissions have reduced by 16%, Auckland industry emissions have reduced by 10%, reflecting the reduction in manufacturing over that time period, both of which have been impacted by COVID lockdowns, as you've said, Mayor Goff. Clearly, Auckland was impacted by lockdowns more than other regions in that time frame. One of the key elements that we've drawn from that is that transport is the biggest change in that reduction. So household emissions in terms of energy consumption at a household level remained relatively stable, but transport emissions decreased during that time. They were the most significant proportion of that household emissions decrease. As I mentioned earlier, petrol consumption reduced by 11% during that time frame. So there's a direct correlation there between petrol consumption and emissions. So vehicle kilometres travelled we would expect to be down, and that's reflected in the data. It is too early to say whether that is a future continual downward trend. Clearly we hope it is. But we do need to just take into account that the last year or two have been certainly different to previous years and what was expected. It's also important to note with the way in which Stats NZ accounts for greenhouse gas emissions by region, they include the agricultural emissions of that region. So you will notice from those stats that Southland, for example, has very high emissions. Canterbury has high emissions. They also attribute emissions from power generation to that region. So, for example, the Waikato has the emissions from Huntly Power Station attributed to it rather than them being attributed to the consumer of that energy, which is the way that we account for emissions in Auckland through our inventory.
So, just to follow up, if I may, Mr. Chair, when do you think we'll be able to properly evaluate what the underlying trend is as a result of some of the changes that we're starting to put into effect? Because, look, the points you've made are totally valid. It'd be nice for us to pat ourselves on the chest and say we've got the lowest per capita emissions of the country, but that, that doesn't take into account agriculture and nor our use of the power that comes out of Huntly. But when do you think we'll be able to get a better idea of how we're tracking? How soon could that be?
So I'll answer that through the Chair. I'll answer that question in two ways. So firstly, Auckland Council produces a regional greenhouse gas inventory. As you know from the presentation, the last one is 2018. 2019 is being published shortly later this year. We are reliant on data from MFE, national level data from MFE, and also the Stats NZ regional data for our inventory. The Stats NZ data has been accelerated in terms of its publication. So the 2021 data was published 9 months after the end of 2021. The previous data set, it took 21 months to publish that data. So we are now able to start the preparation of our 2021 regional inventory. So we're playing catch up now that that information has been published, but we can start work on that. So the 2021 inventory will be published much sooner than you would expect based on the 29 inventory coming out soon. It won't be another 2 years, 3 years, it will be sooner than that. However, that's still 2021 and it's still a little way off. The second part of my response is that we are working on the early stages of understanding how we can develop a dashboard to illustrate action on emissions. So a dashboard that draws on data from industry, proxy data that is relevant to emissions reduction, bringing that together in one place so that we can provide not real-time but closer to real-time analysis and information on emissions reduction across the region, and also importantly look to link that back to interventions and policies so that we have a clearer and more up-to-date picture of how we're performing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is all the questions we have, I believe. And we'll move to comment. Member Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew, and your team. And I just want to emphasise at the outset that I absolutely 100% support the recommendation B, which acknowledges all the great work that's being done. It is that disappointment around the inability to, after a 9-month period, to see any obvious progress or even any obvious attempt. So I guess as an outgoing member of the IMSB, it would be really good to see some concrete effort being made, because you did mention it was hard. Believe me, I know more than anyone how hard it is. What is the go forward? It's not a question because we're past question time, the hypothetical. What is it that is going to happen for the incoming member from IMSB to continue to pursue this line of question around a priority that's not being prioritised? That's at the crux of this corridor. I am hoping that there will be a concrete answer next time when it is canvassed yet again and it involves more than a hui next week. The notion of a partnership being put into a slide that's presented to us all, that in fact doesn't refer to mana whenua nor mātāwaka for that notion, is also something that I find hugely surprising when mana whenua invested heavily into tāruki a tāwhiri, and they would probably be looking for the results of their investment. And if they're not seeing that, maybe it might diminish the value add that they did provide if it's not easily visible. So visibility, accountability, true meaning of partnership, all of those things hopefully will be encompassed moving forward in a progress report or the wider context of the tāruki a tāwhiri, but specifically the priority, te pua waitanga o te tātai, so it has some meaning and action attached to the meaning. I'm going to leave it there, but do acknowledge absolutely, recalling you from your very first hui in front of this committee, that a lot of work has been done in a very complex area. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Wilson. And I also didn't move it, but Deputy Chair Pippa would like to move, and I'll second that. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just really briefly, just want to thank everyone involved for producing what's a really good report. You know, it's easy to thunder from the pulpit around this kind of stuff, and I'm as guilty as anyone. I'll now put my hand on heart for that. But we need to take stock and look at the positive work that's being done, and the report really shows that in a really clear light. So things like the transport emissions reduction work, the climate action targeted rate work, you know, council's not doing nothing. In fact, they're doing quite a lot of good stuff, and I'm really proud of that. The recent announcement of bus drivers getting more money, getting paid closer to what they're actually worth, I think that's really great from a climate perspective, because that will eventually help attract bus drivers, which will try and tackle that cancellation problem, which is really hitting a lot of suburban communities hard. But, you know, at the same time, the report is clear and the media have been clear around this. I've seen an article about that this morning, that some of the big pronouncements here are not actually translating to on-the-ground support when we're working with local communities with projects in their area and trying to convince people that actually there's a big conversation around climate that we all have to have all across the city. You know, and frankly, we've seen local politicians and local candidates that have jumped in on these kind of causes and really stoked that community skepticism and said, look, we've got to tackle climate, sure, but just not here. Just not in this community, just not in this town centre. Well, that's not the sort of attitude that we need to be doing going forward if we're going to actually make meaningful change for people's lives in a difficult climate future. So just that kind of word of warning. I did say I was going to be positive, but I don't want to end on a negative note. Great work, staff, and just acknowledging your work. We just got to keep going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? No. Just want to firstly acknowledge Member Wilson's comments and concerns, and I share those, and we have discussed them with the team a number of times. And although on a project level, a climate action targeted rate level, TERP level, individual items have been really intense work with mana whenua and Mātā Waka partnership and engagement, the overall project needs to be prioritised, and I know the team are looking at that. I know that we have only had this funding for just over a year to embed this, and staff and Māori expert advisors coming into Matthew's team have only been of recent, and I think there has been a hesitancy to try and embed something that is not genuine or not with everyone on board. So, but I do totally take on board Member Wilson's points around the way in which mana whenua and Mātā Waka took in partnership Te Tarakia Tāwhiri and gifted a name and took us through that journey together. It needs to continue through the implementation. But I think at the same time, it's trying, everyone's demanding action, so it's trying to do those two things at the same time, which is clearly not optimal right now. So thank you, Member Wilson, for keeping on that point, and we'll definitely have ASAP a proper situation that can be explained and shown the work through in the next couple of months for the next council and next IMSB to pick up as well. But overall, I did want to acknowledge the work of the Matthew and team and all the staff across the council and CCOs that have worked on climate change related activity, because we had a tiny team with not much resource, with plans being developed to this term having significant plans, far more plans. I know Matthew and his team doing weekends and nights to get things over the line. I think to prepare the climate action targeted rate, most of you work through your Christmas break to get the actions and things put together, literally walking while running or whatever the saying is, to get true action on climate. I think of the many things pushed through the climate initiatives in the 10-year budget last year, now with that ramped up with that $1 billion climate action targeted rate, the things that are underway are significant, even down to the boilers in the pools and our switching out our own car fleet that you kind of forget about because we're into bus routes and EV ferries, and the most significant planting program in the history of Tamaki Makaurau that is happening across in our streets and our regional parks. That this is a step forward. It's been great to see near unanimous support for these plans and strategies over the last 3 years as well. So just want to acknowledge our city, but definitely the staff who have driven this and now have the funding to start employing people to actually roll this out to help reduce our emissions and fight the wrath of climate change that is happening on all of our doorsteps at the moment. So thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to work on this, and this our last major item of the term. We will say all those in favour.
Aye.
Aye.
And anyone opposed?
Aye.
Cool. Anyone opposed? Sorry, I interrupted Councillor Casey. Thank you very much. Carried. And our item 13, our summary of information and memoranda and briefings. Can I have a mover? Deputy Chair, seconder, Councillor Young. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
There was no one to speak to that.
Aye.
Cool.
Aye.
Right, and there were no extraordinary items. And I will just wrap up briefly with a thank you again, and just like to acknowledge the incredible work that has come across this committee over this 3 years, a very, very difficult 3 years. I remember when we kicked off, we had no idea there was a pandemic coming. So there was a lot of hope and promise, and I think we have got there. I think it's probably not good to list, because I'll miss people out, but I think the passing Te Tarakia Tāwhiri and the Transport Emissions Reduction Plan are probably pretty big highlights. Water strategy, so I'm not going to start listing them because there is a list here, but I can see that there are other programs that are missed off this list, so I won't list them all, but just want to acknowledge this term's action, even under the most difficult times, to get what is obviously a greater struggle for our country, our city, and the world is around climate change. When those first couple months, well, that first week of the year in 2020 was, the skies were red from the Australian fires, and then we had pandemics and storms ever since. So I just want to acknowledge the work here, the close working relationship with mana whenua, the things that we've been able to do with our CCOs and with our communities. And I think for the next term, the next council, they've got a big job to do. Hopefully we'll all be there, apart from those who are retiring, that to do this job and continue to basically grow the action that we have told Aucklanders we will do. So thanks to all the staff for this meeting today, and yes, we will head off into the wild blue yonder sunset. And thank you very much for this term, everyone, and thank you to the members of the IMSB and councillors on the line, and have a fantastic day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Richard. See ya.